palace of Aurelian had survived wars, plagues, and 3 emperors with a talent for cruelty. It had not, however, survived Prince Kaelric's RUTs with dignity. The first warning came at dusk. The air itself changed, thickened, heavy with the metallic bite of alpha pheromones bleeding through ancient stone walls and gold-inlaid doors. Courtiers faltered mid-step. Servants went pale. Even the palace hounds whimpered and fled their kennels. By the time the great bells rang, once, twice, and then a third time as one cracked clean through, the entire inner palace was already in motion. "RUT declaration confirmed," a court physician shouted, running and very much not looking back. "His Highness has entered full onset. Activate suppression barriers immediately." Magic flared along the corridors. Sigils burned blue, then red, then flickered uncertainly, as they always did, because no barrier had ever fully held the mad prince. Servants scattered like startled birds. "I'm not staying," someone cried, dropping a tray of silver goblets that shattered spectacularly on the marble floor. "Didn't you hear about the West Wing last time? They said he tore iron restraints apart." That was exaggerated. The wall was gone. A stampede followed. Orders were barked. Doors slammed. Curtains were drawn. Even the bravest guards retreated to positions well outside the prince's chambers, gripping spears they knew would be useless if things went truly wrong. Inside the palace, there was a rule, unwritten but absolute. No Omega was to be anywhere near Prince Kaelric during RUT. No Beta was obligated to remain, and no Alpha was foolish enough to try, which was why, when the final evacuation bell rang, no one was supposed to be left behind, no one except Saren. The voice was calm, too calm. Saren stopped mid-stride, one hand gripping the strap of his satchel, heart pounding hard enough he could feel it in his throat. He turned slowly. Ilian stood at the end of the corridor, lantern light catching the silver embroidery of a servant's uniform that had been mended too carefully to be standard issue. His dark hair was tied back neatly. His expression was composed, eyes sharp and thoughtful despite the chaos around them. "You're not thinking of going back," Saren said flatly. "I am." Saren stared at him. The distant roar echoed down the halls then, low, fractured, furious, not quite human, not quite bestial. The sound of an alpha fighting his own instincts and losing ground inch by inch. Saren swallowed. "That's suicide." Ilian tilted his head. "It's duty. Don't dress it up. You're an Omega. You know what happens. I know what they say happens." Ilian stepped closer, the scent of him, subtle, cool like night-blooming flowers, barely noticeable beneath the suffocating alpha haze creeping through the stones. "I also know what happens when he's left alone." Saren clenched his jaw. They both knew. The broken furniture, the bloodied hands, the way the prince never remembered what he'd said or begged for afterward. "You weren't assigned to him tonight," Saren said. "The steward didn't call your name." "No," Ilian agreed softly. "He didn't." Another roar thundered through the palace, closer now. Magic flared again, then guttered like a dying flame. Saren exhaled sharply. "Ilian, look at me." Ilian did. "You go in there," Saren said, voice low, urgent, "and the court will tear you apart whether you live or die. They'll call you reckless, at best. A temptress at worst." Ilian smiled faintly. "They already do." Before Saren could stop him, Ilian turned and walked back toward the prince's chambers. Saren swore under his breath. Then, because he was a Beta, and therefore spectacularly cursed with common sense and loyalty in equal measure, he followed. The doors to Prince Kaelric's chambers were reinforced steel, etched with runes meant to withstand siege magic. They were cracked, not shattered, not torn off their hinges, cracked, as if something inside had pressed against them, hard, and then forced itself to stop. The smell hit them fully there, raw alpha, heat, frustration, control fraying at the edges. Saren reached for Ilian's arm. "Last chance." Ilian placed his hand over Saren's, gentle. "If I don't go in," he said quietly, "he will hurt himself." Saren closed his eyes. Then he stepped forward and shoved the door open with his shoulder. Inside, the room was destruction held barely in check. Furniture lay overturned but not broken. Curtains were torn from their rods, pooling like fallen banners. The bed, massive, carved from ancient oak, was splintered at one corner, claw marks gouged deep into the wood. And in the center of it all, Prince Kaelric Aurelian knelt on the floor, chains of glowing magic wrapped around his wrists and throat, biting deep enough to draw blood. His silver blonde hair clung damply to his face. His eyes, bright gold, feral with RUT, snapped up instantly. A snarl tore from his chest. Leave. The word shook the room. Ilian didn't flinch. He knelt instead. Your Highness, he said softly, as though addressing a wounded animal rather than the most dangerous alpha in the Empire. It's Ilian. Kelric froze. The chains rattled as his breathing stuttered, then hitched. His gaze dragged over Ilian's form, pupils blown wide, scent flaring. And then he turned his face away violently, slamming his head back against the wall. Get out, he growled, voice breaking. Both of you. Now. Saren stepped forward without thinking. We're not here to bind you, Your Highness. Kelric laughed, sharp, humorless. Then you're fools, maybe, Ilian said gently. But we're staying. For a long moment the only sound was the prince's ragged breathing, and beneath it, something else. Relief. Outside the chamber, palace servants pressed their ears to doors, already whispering. Because the mad prince was not alone during his RUT, and the night had only just begun. Prince Kelric had endured pain before. He had endured wounds, poisons, curses whispered into wine cups, and the slow grinding cruelty of expectation. But this was worse, because this time he was not alone. His senses were aflame. The RUT clawed through him like wildfire, demanding dominance, claiming, touch. The magic chains bit into his skin, cold and burning at once, anchoring him to the last scraps of reason he possessed, and standing only a few steps away. An omega, a beta, his hands shook. Why, Kelric ground out, voice low and ragged. Are you still here? Ilian remained kneeling, spine straight, eyes lowered, not in submission, but in respect. Saren stood half a step behind him, close enough that Kelric could smell him too, steady, grounding, maddeningly calm. We were not ordered to leave, Ilian said. That is a lie, Kelric snapped, his head lifted, eyes blazing gold. Everyone is ordered to leave. Yes, Ilian agreed. But no one ordered us to stay away. The words landed softly, and struck hard. Kelric laughed again, breathless and sharp. Clever Omega. I've been called worse. Saren shot Ilian a look that clearly said this is not the time, but said nothing aloud. Kelric dragged his gaze to Saren instead. And you? He demanded. What excuse does a beta have? Saren met his eyes steadily, even as his pulse thudded in his ears. Someone had to make sure the Omega didn't do something suicidal. Kelric blinked. Once. Then, to his own horror, a sound escaped him that might have been a broken chuckle. The chains tightened instantly in response. He hissed, muscles locking as magic flared painfully against his throat. Ilian moved before thinking. Your Highness. The moment his scent shifted, just a fraction, blooming unconsciously with concern. The room reacted, the runes etched into the walls flickered. Saren felt at first a pressure change, like the air itself inhaling. Oh, he muttered, that's not good. Kelric's head snapped up. The Omega's scent reached him fully then. Not sharp, not cloying, not provocative, soothing, like cool water poured over fire. Kelric sucked in a breath he hadn't meant to take. The chains rattled. No, he growled, terror threading his fury. Stop, don't scent. I'm not, Ilian said, startled. His hand flew to his mouth. I didn't mean to, but his body betrayed him, instinct answering instinct, something old and buried waking in his blood. The magic reacted again. A faint glow traced the floor between them, delicate as spider silk. Saren swore softly. Your Highness, he said quickly. Permission to speak freely? Kelric clenched his fists until blood dripped from his palms. You already are. This room is ancient, Saren continued. Older than the current dynasty. The magic here wasn't built for suppression, it was built for balance. Kelric's eyes widened slightly. No, he whispered. That magic was outlawed. Yes, Saren said grimly, which means it's never been dismantled. The glow brightened. Ilian felt it then. A gentle tug, not physical but felt, as if something were reaching out to him and saying, there you are. He gasped. Kelric snarled, fighting the chains with renewed desperation. Get him out, now, before I... Ilian looked up. Their eyes met, and something ancient, patient, and deeply inconvenient snapped into place. The glow surged. The chains loosened, not falling away, but easing. Kelric froze, breath hitching as the agony dulled for the first time since the RUT had begun. Silence fell. Then... What did you do? Kelric whispered. Ilian shook his head slowly. I don't know. Saren stared at both of them, then down at the glowing sigils now curling faintly around his own boots. "Why am I glowing?" he asked flatly. The room answered by settling further. The air thinned, the pressure eased. Kaelrik's breathing slowed, still heavy, but no longer frantic. The mad prince sagged forward, chains clinking softly as his forehead touched the cool stone floor. "I can think," he murmured, stunned. Gods, I can think." Ilian rose to his knees without realizing he was moving. "Your Highness?" Kaelrik hesitated. Then, very slowly, he lifted his head. Up close, the ferocity fell away, leaving exhaustion etched into every line of his face. His eyes were still gold, but now threaded with something fragile. "Don't come closer," he said quietly. "If I lose control again—" "You won't?" Saren said. Both of them looked at him. Saren shrugged, oddly calm. "You're not alone. You're anchored." Kaelrik stared. "By what?" Saren glanced pointedly between Omega and Alpha. By who? The implications settled like a dropped plate. Outside the chamber, the palace erupted. Physicians argued. Nobles whispered. A senior mage burst into the antechamber shouting, "The RUT signature is stabilizing." "What? That's impossible!" "Unless—" Inside the chamber, Ilian gently reached out and took Kaelrik's trembling hand. The magic did not flare. It hummed. Kaelrik closed his eyes, and for the first time since his first RUT, he slept. Saren leaned back against the wall, exhaling shakily. "Well," he muttered, "we're absolutely ruined." Ilian smiled faintly, eyes soft as he watched the prince rest. "Yes," he agreed, "but he isn't." Prince Kaelrik awoke to silence, not the oppressive, echoing quiet of isolation chambers or the ringing void that followed his RUTs, but a living silence, warm and close and occupied. His first conscious thought was wrong. His second was panic. His third was far worse. "I can smell them." The Alpha froze. His senses were still sharpened, RUT not yet passed but muted, smoothed at the edges like claws sheathed in velvet. Beneath his own scent, steady and dominant, lay something cooler and softer. Omega. And beneath that, faint, grounding, unmistakable, Beta. Kaelrik's eyes snapped open. Sunlight filtered through the torn curtains, painting the wrecked chamber gold. The chains still lay around his wrists, but their glow was dim now, more ceremonial than binding, and seated on the floor beside the bed, Ilian slept, head resting against the mattress, fingers loosely curled where they still brushed Kaelrik's hand. On the other side of the room, slumped ungracefully in a chair with his boots still on, Saren snored softly, arms crossed like a guard who had refused to yield even to exhaustion. Kaelrik's breath caught. They hadn't left. They were alive. And, impossibly, he had not hurt them. Slowly, carefully, Kaelrik shifted. The chains did not tighten. The magic did not burn. Nothing punished him. His gaze returned to Ilian. The Omega's face was slack with sleep, lashes dark against pale skin, expression peaceful in a way Kaelrik had never once seen directed at him. His scent was faint now, restrained by rest, but still present enough that Kaelrik felt steadier, dangerous. Whispered the part of him raised in court doctrine. Necessary, answered something older. The door slammed open. "Your Highness?" Kaelrik jerked upright. Ilian startled awake with a soft gasp, instantly alert, while Saren shot to his feet, already moving to place himself between the prince and the intruder. The court physician skidded to a halt just inside the chamber, eyes bulging. Behind him stood two mages, a high-ranking noblewoman, and no fewer than 4 guards who looked deeply uncomfortable about all of this. The physician stared at the prince, awake, coherent, at the Omega, unrestrained, at the Beta, blocking the doorway like a shield. "You're conscious," the physician croaked. "Yes," Kaelrik said coolly, drawing himself upright despite the chains still clinging to his wrists. "I am—" The noblewoman, Lady Vale, head of the Royal Council, narrowed her eyes. "Explain." Saren didn't wait. "With respect, my lady," he said evenly, "you burst into a sovereign's chamber without permission." Her gaze snapped to him. "You are a servant." "I am also," Saren replied, "the reason His Highness is alive and lucid this morning." The silence that followed was loud. Lady Vile turned slowly to Ilian. "And you," she said coldly. "Omega, why were you not evacuated?" Ilian rose smoothly, bowing just enough to be polite, not enough to be submissive. "Because His Highness asked us to leave," he said calmly, "not to abandon him." Kaelrik stiffened. He hadn't asked, but he hadn't ordered them away either. Lady Val's lips thinned. You scented him. Ilian met her gaze without flinching. I did not intend to. That hardly matters, the mages whispered urgently to one another. One bond line visible. No, 3. Look at the floor. That's impossible. Kaelric's patience snapped. Enough. The room stilled instantly. He drew himself to full height, chains clinking softly. Even weakened by RUT, even bound, the weight of his authority pressed down hard. No one touches them, he said. No one interrogates them. And no one removes them from this chamber. Lady Vale stared. Your Highness, I am not finished. He turned his gaze inward then, toward Ilian, then Saren. I will not pretend this was planned, Kaelric said quietly, but I will not allow the court to punish loyalty. Saren blinked. Ilian's breath caught. The mages exchanged alarmed looks. My prince, one ventured carefully. If this is what we believe it is, say it, Kaelric commanded. The mage swallowed. A triadic stabilizing bond, alpha, omega, and beta, pre-dynastic, rare to the point of myth. Lady Vale's face drained of color. That magic was banned, she hissed. Yes, Kaelric said softly, because it works. The words landed like a blade. Outside the chamber, the palace buzzed. Servants whispered of an omega who had calmed the mad prince, of a beta who had stood unburned in RUT fire, of chains that had loosened on their own. Inside the chamber, Kaelric reached up and, with deliberate calm, unclasped the magic at his wrists. The chains fell away. No one dared stop him. He stepped forward, slowly, carefully, and stopped in front of Ilian. I frightened you, Kaelric said. Ilian shook his head. You trusted me. Kaelric's throat tightened, then he turned to Saren. You defied protocol. Saren shrugged. Frequently, a huff of laughter escaped the prince before he could stop himself. The court stared. The mad prince, laughing. This changes nothing, Lady Vale said sharply. You cannot keep them. Kaelric looked at her, eyes steady. I already have. Silence fell again. Somewhere deep in the palace, the bells rang, not in alarm, but announcement, and everyone knew whatever had happened during the prince's RUT had not ended with the night. It had only begun. By noon, the entire palace knew. By evening, the entire capital thought it knew. By dawn the next day, the story had already splintered into a dozen versions, each more scandalous than the last. The mad prince had taken an omega to his bed. No. He had bound one. No. 2 servants had seduced him during RUT. No. An omega had enchanted him. No. There was a beta involved. That last rumor made people especially uncomfortable. Within the prince's wing, however, none of that mattered. Because no one was allowed to leave. This is confinement, Saren said flatly, arms crossed as he surveyed the sitting chamber that had been hastily converted into something resembling livable space. They've dressed it up with silk cushions and fresh fruit, but this is still confinement. Kaelric, seated by the window with a goblet of cooling tonic untouched at his side, did not deny it. Yes, he said, it is. Ilian sat at the low table, carefully refolding a stack of linens that had been delivered with unnecessary flourish. His movements were precise, controlled, his calm the kind that came from long practice, not lack of fear. They are afraid, Ilian said quietly. Saren snorted. They should be. Kaelric's lips twitched, despite himself. The bond pulsed faintly then, not painful, not overwhelming, just there. A subtle awareness tugged at all 3 of them, like a thread drawn too tight to ignore. Saren felt it as tension in his shoulders easing whenever Kaelric exhaled. Ilian felt it as warmth settling behind his ribs whenever Kaelric's gaze lingered too long. Kaelric felt it worst of all. He could feel them. Not thoughts, not emotions exactly, but presence, weight, stability. He had spent his life being managed, restrained, feared. This was something else entirely. A knock sounded at the door. Saren moved instantly, hand drifting to the dagger he technically wasn't supposed to have. Your Highness, came Lady Vale's clipped voice. The council requests your attendance. Kaelric did not rise. No, he said. A pause. This is not optional. Kaelric turned from the window at last, golden eyes sharp. Then you may bring the council here. Silence. Then, very carefully, Lady Vale spoke again. The omega and the beta are to be removed. Ilian stiffened. Saren stepped forward. Kaelric's control snapped. Not violently, but absolutely. No, he said, voice dropping. The word carried weight, old magic, royal authority, and something deeper still. They remain. The bond thrummed. Outside the door, a mage hissed. Do you feel that? It's reinforcing. That's not possible without. The door opened. Lady Vale entered with visible reluctance, flanked by mages who refused to step too close to the trio at the center of the room. Her gaze flicked to Ilian first. You will be examined, she said. We must determine the extent of the contamination. Saren bristled. Contamination. Kaelric moved before either of them could speak again. He placed himself, not in front of them, but with them. Close enough that his sleeve brushed Ilian's fingers, close enough that Saren felt the faint pressure of his presence at his back. They are not ill, Kaelric said, and they are not property. Lady Vale's composure cracked. You cannot keep an Omega unregistered, she snapped, nor elevate a Beta beyond his station. I can, Kaelric replied. If I make it policy. The room went deathly quiet. One of the mages cleared his throat nervously. Your Highness, the bond has not weakened since yesterday. Another added, in fact, it's deepening. Ilian inhaled sharply. Saren muttered, that seems fast. Kaelric closed his eyes briefly. Because he could feel it too. The way the ache of RUT no longer gnawed so sharply when Ilian was near, the way his thoughts aligned more cleanly when Saren spoke, grounding him. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't an accident. This is pre-claim bonding, Lady Vale said tightly. If it completes, then it completes. Kaelric interrupted. She stared at him. You would upend centuries of law. Kaelric opened his eyes. I was born to do that. Later, when the council retreated, furious, frightened, and very aware that they had lost ground, the chamber felt suddenly too quiet. Saren let out a long breath. Well, that went poorly. Ilian laughed softly despite himself. Kaelric turned to them, expression unreadable. I will not force you to stay, he said quietly. If you wish to leave, I will find a way. The bond flared, not violently, but insistently. Ilian felt it like a hand closing gently around his heart. Saren felt it as a sharp, grounding pull in his chest. Both of them looked at Kaelric at the same time. We're not leaving, Saren said. Ilian nodded. Not now. Kaelric swallowed. Something in his chest, tight, aching, unfamiliar, finally gave way. Then he said softly, stay with me. Outside, the palace whispered. Inside, something ancient and forbidden settled more firmly into place, and far above the city, the bells rang again. This time, in warning. Night fell differently in the prince's wing. There were no alarms, no magic barriers flaring to life, no shouted orders or panicked retreats. Instead, the lamps were lit low. The doors were closed, not sealed, and for the first time in memory, Prince Kaelric's chambers were not a place of containment. They were a place of decision. Kaelric stood near the hearth, watching the flames curl lazily around the logs. The RUT still lingered beneath his skin, a deep, aching hum rather than a roar. But it was quieter now, manageable, because they were still here. Behind him, Saren sat at the small table, methodically sharpening a dagger that did not need it, the scrape of stone against metal steady and grounding. Ilian moved about the chamber with careful purpose, straightening what little could be salvaged from the previous night's destruction. Domestic. The word struck Kaelric so suddenly it nearly stole his breath. I should warn you, he said without turning, voice low. Tonight may be difficult. Saren snorted. You're a bit late for warnings, Your Highness. Ilian paused, then looked up. Do you mean the RUT? Kaelric nodded. The first night after stabilization is often worse emotionally. The instincts don't understand restraint. They only understand absence. The bond stirred at the word. Ilian felt it as a soft pull, like gravity shifting just enough to be noticeable. Saren felt it as tension gathering behind his sternum, not unpleasant but insistent. Neither of them moved away. Then, Ilian said gently, we'll stay close. Kaelric turned. Up close, in lamplight, he looked less like a terrifying alpha and more like a man pushed too far for too long, shoulders rigid with held-back instinct, eyes bright with something that hovered between hope and fear. You don't understand, he said quietly. If I ask, you're not asking, Saren cut in. You're warning. That earned him a long look. Then Kaelric exhaled slowly. Then sit, he said. Both of you. They did. Not kneeling, not standing at attention. They sat, one on either side of him, close enough that their warmth bled together, close enough that the bond sighed in relief. For a long moment no one spoke. The fire crackled. Outside, the palace held its breath. Kaelric's hands trembled where they rested on his knees. Ilian noticed. Without thinking, he reached out and placed his hand over Kaelric's. The prince stiffened, then slowly relaxed. The contact was simple. Innocent, and it nearly broke him. "I've never been allowed this," Kaelric admitted, voice rough. "Choice, proximity, people who stay because they want to." Saren leaned back slightly, shoulder brushing Kaelric's arm. "Then get used to it." Kaelric huffed a quiet laugh. The bond warmed. It wasn't a rush. It wasn't overwhelming. It was right. As the hours slipped by, fatigue crept in, heavy and inevitable. The fire burned low. The palace noises faded to distant murmurs. Ilian yawned softly, covering his mouth in embarrassment. Saren stretched. "We should—" He stopped, because Kaelric had gone very still. His breathing had changed, slower, deeper, but strained. His scent shifted subtly, richer, heavier. The RUT stirred again. "I'm fine," Kaelric said immediately, too quickly. "You should sleep, together or apart?" Saren asked calmly. Kaelric hesitated. That hesitation said everything. "There's only one bed," Ilian said quietly. The silence stretched. Then Kaelric nodded once. "We don't have to touch." Saren raised an eyebrow. "That seems optimistic." Ilian smiled faintly. They approached the bed like it might bite. In the end, it was Ilian who climbed in first, settling carefully at the center, back straight, hands folded in his lap. Saren followed, sitting on the opposite side, boots removed but dagger still within reach. Kaelric stood there a long moment, then he lay down between them, not pressed close, not claiming, just there. The bond hummed, content. As sleep crept in, Kaelric felt something he had never allowed himself before: safety. Ilian drifted first, head tipping slightly until it rested against Kaelric's shoulder. Saren followed, one arm flung carelessly over Kaelric's waist like it had always belonged there. Kaelric lay awake between them, heart pounding, not with hunger, with awe. Outside the chamber, Lady Vale listened to the quiet and felt dread coil in her stomach, because this was no longer a mistake, it was a beginning, and somewhere deep within ancient magic, something long dormant smiled. Morning arrived without ceremony. No bells, no guards shouting, no sudden surge of pain or panic. Prince Kaelric woke slowly, warmth pressed against both sides of him, the lingering fog of sleep clinging stubbornly to his thoughts. His first instinct was to freeze. His second was to catalog. Ilian lay curled against his left side, breathing evenly, fingers fisted lightly in the fabric of Kaelric's tunic as if afraid it might vanish. His hair spilled across Kaelric's shoulder, soft and warm, his scent muted but unmistakably there, cool, grounding, steady. On his right, Saren lay sprawled with all the grace of a man who had never once worried about propriety. One arm was slung across Kaelric's waist, heavy and solid, his chin tipped up just enough that his breath brushed Kaelric's throat. Kaelric did not remember inviting either of them closer. The bond pulsed. "Yes, you do," it seemed to say. Kaelric swallowed, carefully, painstakingly. He shifted, testing his control. The RUT stirred faintly, but instead of surging, it paused, waited. That alone nearly undid him. Saren was the first to wake. He blinked once, twice, then looked down at where his arm was draped. "Huh," he murmured. Kaelric stiffened. Saren glanced up at him, eyes sharp despite sleep. For a brief moment, something unreadable flickered across his face. Surprise, assessment, and something warmer that he masked quickly. "Well," Saren said lightly, removing his arm with deliberate slowness. "We didn't die." Ilian stirred at the movement, letting out a soft sound of protest before his eyes fluttered open. He froze, then he flushed. "Oh," he breathed. Your Highness, I didn't mean to." "You didn't do anything wrong," Kaelric said immediately. The speed of his response startled all three of them. Silence followed, thick, charged. The bond tightened, not painfully, but insistently, like a thread pulled too far too fast. Saren felt it first this time, a sharp tug low in his chest that made him inhale reflexively. "Okay," he muttered. "That's new." Ilian pressed a hand to his sternum, eyes widening. "It feels like something's out of balance." Kaelric nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "that." The door knocked, once, twice. All three of them tensed. "Your Highness," came the careful voice of a junior steward. The council has convened. They request— No, Kaelric said, not raising his voice. A pause. They anticipated that response. Of course they did. Kaelric rose from the bed, rolling his shoulders, reclaiming the posture of a prince with deliberate care. But the bond followed him, stretching, not breaking. Ilian winced softly. Saren grimaced. Ah. So we're not supposed to be far apart. Kaelric turned back sharply. Are you hurt? No, Saren said. Just uncomfortable. The bond pulsed again, stronger. Ilian inhaled sharply. It wants proximity. Kaelric closed his eyes. Of course it did. Fine, he said. We attend together. That decision sent a ripple through the bond. Approval, warm and unmistakable. Saren stared. You realize that's going to cause a diplomatic incident. Kaelric opened his eyes, golden and steady. Yes, the council chamber erupted the moment they entered. Whispers turned to gasps, turned to outright staring as Prince Kaelric took his seat. Not alone, but flanked. An Omega at his left, a Beta at his right. Lady Vale's jaw tightened. This is highly inappropriate. Kaelric leaned back slightly, one hand resting on the arm of the throne, close enough that his fingers brushed Saren's sleeve. The bond settled. So is legislating fear, he replied calmly. A mage rose shakily. Your Highness, the bond is active even now. That suggests emotional reinforcement, not just RUT stabilization. Yes, Kaelric said. It does. Lady Vale's eyes narrowed. And how long did you intend to keep them? Kaelric did not hesitate. As long as they choose to stay. The chamber went silent. Ilian's breath caught. Saren felt something twist sharply in his chest, something dangerously close to pride. But beneath it, another emotion stirred, jealousy, not toward the prince, toward Ilian. Saren noticed it the moment the thought surfaced, and hated himself for it. The bond noticed too. It pulled, hard. Saren's breath stuttered. Ilian gasped softly, swaying. Kaelric surged to his feet instantly. Enough. The magic flared, not destructive, but commanding. This bond does not tolerate imbalance, he said, voice resonant with something old, and neither will I. The mages exchanged frightened looks. Lady Vale went pale. Your Highness, she whispered. This is no longer just personal. Kaelric looked down at the two men beside him, one Omega, one Beta, both steadying themselves, both here. I know, he said quietly. Back in the chamber later, Saren exhaled shakily and scrubbed a hand over his face. I don't like that, he admitted. Ilian looked at him gently. Which part? The part where I felt. He hesitated, jaw tightening. Left out. The bond softened, acknowledging, adjusting. Kaelric stepped closer to both of them. Then we address it, he said. Together, neither of them pulled away. Outside the palace, plans were already forming. Inside, something far more dangerous was taking shape, not madness, not RUT, but attachment. And the Empire was not ready for what came next. The bond did not allow silence. Prince Kaelric learned this by accident. They were back in his chambers, the doors closed, the palace mercifully distant for the moment. Saren sat near the window, arms folded, posture controlled but tight. Ilian lingered by the table, fingers fidgeting with the edge of a teacup he had already refilled twice. Kaelric stood between them, feeling the invisible tension like a drawn bowstring. He said nothing. The bond responded by pulling, not physically, emotionally. A sharp pang bloomed in Kaelric's chest, followed immediately by a spike of discomfort from both directions. Saren hissed under his breath. Ilian let out a soft, startled gasp. Kaelric swore. All right. He exhaled slowly, grounding himself. It seems, he said carefully, that avoidance is no longer an option. Saren snorted humorlessly. You're just realizing that? Ilian looked between them, worry creasing his brow. I think it wants us to speak honestly. Even when we'd rather not. The bond warmed faintly, approving. Kaelric grimaced. Traitorous magic. Saren pushed away from the window at last. Fine. You want honesty? Kaelric nodded. Saren met his gaze squarely. I don't like feeling unnecessary. The words landed harder than any accusation. Kaelric stiffened. You are not. I know what I am, Saren interrupted. A Beta. Replaceable. Useful until I'm not. Ilian's eyes widened. Saren, it's fine, Saren said quickly, though his jaw tightened. I just didn't expect the bond to make it louder. The bond pulsed again, uncomfortable, insistent. Kaelric took a step forward. You are not a buffer, he said quietly. You are not excess. You are the reason I can stand in a room without losing myself. Saren froze. Kaelric turned then, facing Ilian. And you, he continued, voice gentler now, are not here because you soothe me. You are here because you chose me. Ilian's throat bobbed. I was afraid, he admitted softly. Afraid that once the danger passed, you wouldn't need me. The bond tightened, then eased. Kaelric reached out. He did not grab, he did not pull. He simply placed his hand between them, palm open. I am done surviving, he said. I want to choose, the word echoed. Choose, Saren laughed weakly. You're bad at doing things halfway, Your Highness. Kaelric's lips curved. I was never taught moderation. The bond settled, warm and steady now, like a satisfied sigh. That evening, Kaelric made a decision that would haunt the council for years to come. He summoned the royal herald. The man arrived pale and sweating, eyes darting nervously between the prince and his two companions. Prepare an announcement, Kaelric said calmly. Yes, Your Highness? Kaelric did not look away from Ilian and Saren as he spoke. I will be formally courting. The herald choked. Courting, Your Highness? Yes. A pause. Whom, sire? Kaelric finally smiled. Both. The palace erupted. The announcement spread faster than any scandal in living memory. An alpha prince courting an omega was expected. Courting a beta alongside him was unthinkable. Courting them together bordered on treason. Lady Vale shattered a goblet. The bond is corrupting him, she hissed. This cannot be allowed to continue, a mage whispered, trembling, or it is restoring something we destroyed. Within the prince's chambers the mood was quieter. Saren paced. You didn't warn us. I didn't want to ask permission, Kaelric said evenly. From the court, or from fear. Ilian's hands trembled slightly. Courting is public, yes. Permanent, Saren added. Yes, they stared at him. Kaelric met their gazes without flinching. I will not claim you without consent, he said. But I will not pretend this bond is accidental either. The bond thrummed, strong, steady, unmistakably pleased. Ilian exhaled shakily. You're going to change the empire, Saren huffed. Or get us all executed. Kaelric stepped closer to them both. Then, he said softly, we'll face it together. Outside, the bells rang, not in warning, not in alarm, but in proclamation. And somewhere deep beneath the palace, ancient magic stirred again, curious, watchful, and very aware that the prince had stopped merely enduring his fate. He was rewriting it. The empire had rules for courting. They were ancient, rigid, and written by men who had never imagined this situation. Courting was meant to be orderly, predictable, a display of status and lineage, carefully curated for approval. Prince Kaelric's courting shattered all of that before the first bell finished ringing. The grand solar hall filled by mid-morning. Nobles draped in silk and jewels lined the terraces, their whispers overlapping like insects trapped beneath glass. Banners of the royal house hung from vaulted ceilings, catching the sunlight in sharp flashes of gold. At the center of it all stood 3 chairs. Not 2, 3. That alone was enough to send a ripple of unease through the room. Is that a mistake? No. Look at the herald. They're serious. A beta? With an omega? With him? Saren stood stiffly beside the left chair, dressed in formal black trimmed with silver, a color reserved for royal retainers elevated by merit alone. His posture was immaculate, his face composed, but his jaw ached from clenching it too tightly. This is a bad idea, he murmured. Ilian, seated on the right, wore pale blue, the color of unclaimed omegas, not bridal, not submissive, intentional. His hands rested calmly in his lap, though the bond hummed nervously beneath his skin. They're staring, Saren added. Ilian smiled faintly. Let them... Then the hall fell silent. Prince Kaelric entered alone. No guards flanked him. No ceremonial chains adorned his wrists. He wore white and gold, the colors of the crown prince, and nothing else to signal dominance. He walked directly between them. The bond surged, not violently, protectively. The nobles felt it even if they didn't understand it. A pressure, a warning. Kaelric took his seat. The herald swallowed hard and began. By declaration of His Highness Prince Kaelric Aurelian, this assembly bears witness to a formal courting. A noble stood abruptly, Lady Avencrest, Alpha. Old blood. This is an insult, she snapped. Courting requires eligibility. An unregistered omega and a beta servant do not qualify. The hall erupted in murmurs. Kaelric did not raise his voice. Sit, he said. The word carried weight. Lady Avencrest's knees buckled. She dropped back into her seat, face white with fury. Saren's breath caught. Ilian felt the bond flare, pleased, dangerous. Kael'ric continued calmly. Eligibility is determined by choice, mine, and theirs. Another voice cut in. Then prove it. A mage stepped forward, staff glowing faintly. If this bond is real, the mage said, eyes sharp, submit it to verification. Ilian went cold. Saren stiffened. Verification magic during a public assembly is cruel, Kael'ric finished. Yes, that is the point. The mage smiled thinly. If the bond fails, Kael'ric rose. If you touch them, he said softly, you will lose your hand. The mage hesitated. The hall buzzed. Then, unexpectedly, Ilian stood. I'll do it, he said quietly. Saren spun toward him. Ilian. I choose this, Ilian said, voice steady. He turned to Kael'ric. If they doubt our truth, let them see it. Kael'ric searched his face. The bond thrummed. Trust. Very well, Kael'ric said, but we do it my way. He extended his hand, not commanding, inviting. Ilian took it. The reaction was immediate. Magic surged. Not sharp, not invasive, but deep, resonant, ancient. The floor sigils ignited in gold. Gasps echoed through the hall as light arced outward, not just between Alpha and Omega, but snapped sideways. Saren cried out softly as the magic caught him too, wrapping around his wrist, his chest, his spine. What? A noble whispered. That's not possible. The beta, he's included. The magic stabilized. 3 points, 1 circuit. Kael'ric felt it then. Not hunger, not dominance, but completion. Saren staggered, and Kael'ric caught him instantly, one arm steadying him, the other still linked with Ilian. The hall went deathly silent. The mage dropped his staff. Triadic, he whispered in horror. It's not a courtship bond. Lady Vale stood slowly. What is it then? She demanded. Kael'ric looked out over the nobles, terrified, furious, awed. It is partnership, he said clearly. It is consent. It is balance. Saren straightened, heart hammering. And it's not breaking. Ilian squeezed Kael'ric's hand. No matter how hard you try. The bells rang, not once, not twice, but 3 times. An old signal, recognition. Somewhere deep beneath the palace, sealed magic shifted, accepting what the court could not deny. The Mad Prince was no longer alone, and the Empire had just witnessed something it had spent centuries trying to erase. Outside the hall, nobles whispered frantically. Inside, Kael'ric leaned closer to his companions, voice low. They will come for us now. Saren smirked faintly. Let them. Ilian smiled, soft, unafraid. The bond hummed, and for the first time the Empire understood. This was not a scandal. It was a challenge. The palace did not sleep easily after the Solar Hall incident. Neither did the 3 men at its center. The air inside Kael'ric's chambers felt different that night. Charged, but not with danger. With awareness, the bond had quieted after the spectacle, no longer flaring defensively. Instead it lay warm and heavy between them, like a living thing waiting to see what they would do next. Kael'ric stood at the balcony doors, sleeves rolled back, collar loosened. Moonlight silvered his hair, softened the sharp lines of his profile. He had faced councils, wars, and blades without hesitation. But this was terrifying. Behind him, Ilian removed the ceremonial pins from his hair, movement slow, deliberate. Each pin placed on the table made a faint metallic click that echoed louder than it should have. Saren leaned against the wall, jacket discarded, watching both of them with an expression far too thoughtful for comfort. You're pacing, Saren observed quietly. Kael'ric hadn't realized he stopped. I do not wish, Kael'ric began carefully, for tonight to be driven by spectacle, or magic, or pressure. Ilian's gaze lifted in the mirror's reflection. Then what do you wish it to be? He asked softly. Kael'ric turned. The distance between them suddenly felt enormous. I wish it to be ours, he said. Silence fell, not heavy, not awkward. Anticipatory. Saren pushed away from the wall and crossed the room slowly. Not to interrupt, not to command, to stand close. Then stop speaking like a prince, Saren said gently, and start speaking like a man. Kael'ric's breath hitched, the bond stirred, curious, bright. Ilian stepped closer too, until the space between the 3 of them narrowed into something intimate and fragile. Kael'ric, Ilian said, his name without title. The sound of it did something dangerous to the prince's composure. His hand lifted before he could stop himself, not forceful, not claiming. He brushed his knuckles along Illian's jaw, slowly, as if expecting the moment to shatter. Illian inhaled sharply, but did not pull away. The bond warmed. Saren watched carefully. There it was again, that flicker of jealousy, quick and sharp. The bond noticed. It tugged sideways. Kaelric felt it instantly. He turned his head and met Saren's gaze. Without breaking contact with Illian, Kaelric extended his other hand. An invitation. Saren stared at it for a long moment, then he stepped forward and took it. The connection snapped into alignment. Warmth surged, not overwhelming, not consuming. Balanced. Kaelric exhaled slowly, tension bleeding from his shoulders. "This," he murmured, almost in awe. "This is what it wants." Illian's fingers slid lightly from Kaelric's jaw to his collar, adjusting fabric that didn't need adjusting. "And what do you want?" Illian asked. Kaelric's control wavered. "I want," he said honestly, voice low, "to touch you without fear." The room went very still. Saren stepped closer, chest brushing Kaelric's arm. "Then do it," he said. The permission undid him. Kaelric's hand moved from Illian's jaw to the curve of his neck, thumb brushing lightly along sensitive skin. Not possessive, reverent. Illian shivered. Saren felt it through the bond like a spark. Without thinking, Saren's hand slid to Kaelric's waist, steadying, grounding. Kaelric's breath deepened. He leaned forward, slow enough to stop, close enough to feel Illian's warmth before their foreheads touched. Not a kiss. Not yet. Just breath shared in the narrow space between. Saren shifted closer behind Kaelric, chest firm against his back now, one hand splayed flat over the prince's racing heart. "You're shaking," Saren murmured. Kaelric let out a soft, almost embarrassed laugh. "I am," Illian smiled faintly. "So are we." The bond hummed, approval, warmth, something deeply content. Kaelric finally closed the distance. The kiss was not fierce, it was slow, testing. A brush of lips that lingered, deepened carefully, learned rather than conquered. Illian's fingers curled into Kaelric's tunic, breath hitching softly. Saren's grip at Kaelric's waist tightened, not in restraint but in silent participation. When Kaelric finally drew back, his forehead rested against Illian's again. He turned his head slightly. Saren met him halfway. That kiss was different, firmer, steadier, grounded like the man himself. And when they separated, none of them stepped away. Instead, they laughed softly, breathless, startled by their own courage. "This," Saren said quietly, "is far more dangerous than court politics." Kaelric smiled. A real one, unguarded. "Good," he murmured. The bond wrapped around them, not demanding, not flaring, simply holding. Later, when they lay together, not out of necessity, not from exhaustion, but by deliberate choice, the air felt warm and steady. No alarms, no fear, only shared breath in the dark. And for the first time, the mad prince did not dread the night. He welcomed it. The palace was quiet, not peacefully quiet, suspiciously quiet. But none of the three men in Kaelric's chambers were thinking about politics. The air felt thick, not with RUT this time, but anticipation. Kaelric stood at the edge of the bed, hands braced against the carved wood, breathing slow and controlled. The moonlight traced the powerful lines of his back beneath the thin linen of his undone shirt. He had never been more aware of his body, or of theirs. Behind him, Illian stepped closer, barefoot against marble, each movement deliberate. His fingers hovered before finally touching, lightly, at Kaelric's shoulder. The reaction was immediate, a shiver, not loss of control. Surrender. Saren watched from a few paces away, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled. His gaze was darker tonight, less guarded, less careful. "You're still holding back," Saren said quietly. Kaelric exhaled slowly. "I have spent my life holding back." "Not tonight," Illian whispered. The bond pulsed, not demanding. "Inviting." Kaelric turned. Illian's eyes were luminous in the dim light, soft but unwavering. Saren stepped in behind Kaelric, close enough that their bodies aligned, solid warmth at his back, trapped between them, or protected by them. Kaelric wasn't sure which. Saren's hand slid slowly from Kaelric's waist to his chest, palm flat over his heart. It was racing. "Still afraid?" Saren murmured near his ear. "Yes," Kelrick admitted. Ilian's fingers traced downward from Kelrick's shoulder, slow, exploratory. Not teasing, not rushing, choosing. Good, Ilian said softly. So are we. The honesty broke something open. Kelrick's restraint didn't shatter, it melted. He cupped Ilian's face and kissed him deeply this time. No hesitation, no testing. Slow at first, then hungrier as Ilian responded, hands sliding into his hair. Behind him, Saren's breath warmed his neck. A kiss pressed there, firm, grounding, claiming without force. Kelrick groaned softly into Ilian's mouth. The sound made both of them shiver. The bond flared. Bright, full, alive. Not chaotic, perfectly aligned. Clothing became unnecessary. Not ripped, not frantic. Removed, deliberately. Each layer peeled away felt like shedding expectation, fear, isolation. Skin met skin. Heat bloomed. Kelrick's hands were careful, almost reverent, tracing Ilian's waist, mapping the shape of him like something sacred. Saren's touch was steadier, stronger. Palms sliding over Kelrick's back, anchoring him in the moment. 3 breaths, 1 rhythm. Ilian gasped when Kelrick's lips traced down his throat, and the sound traveled through the bond like lightning. Saren exhaled sharply at the sensation echoing back at him. That, Saren muttered, voice rough, is unfair. Kelrick laughed softly against Ilian's skin. Then come here, he murmured. And Saren did. The bed welcomed them in a slow tangle of limbs and warmth. No rushing, no taking, only giving. The bond deepened, not snapping, not sealing like a cage, but blooming like something long-starved, finally given sun. Kelrick felt their pleasure like shared fire, felt their trust like a weight placed willingly in his hands. When Ilian arched into him, breath breaking into a soft cry, Saren answered with a low sound of his own, fingers tightening in Kelrick's hair. Everything layered, everything intertwined. It was not RUT, it was not instinct alone, it was choice. And when they finally collapsed together, breathless, flushed, hearts pounding in chaotic harmony, the bond settled around them like silk pulled tight, complete. Kelrick lay between them, one arm around each, chest rising slowly. I did not lose control, he whispered, almost disbelieving. Saren huffed a tired laugh. No. Ilian brushed his lips softly over Kelrick's collarbone. You trusted us. The prince closed his eyes. The mad prince, feared in RUT, now held willingly between an omega and a beta who had chosen him in return. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the capital. Inside, 3 heartbeats fell into the same steady rhythm. And far beneath the palace, ancient magic awakened fully for the first time in centuries. Not in violence. In union. The storm did not break during the night. It waited. So did the palace. Prince Kelrick woke before dawn. For a moment he did not move. He simply existed. Warmth against his chest. Warmth at his back. The steady, unhurried rhythm of breathing that did not belong to him alone. Ilian lay half-draped across him, hair a dark spill against pale skin. One hand resting over Kelrick's heart as if claiming it in sleep. Saren was pressed along his back, solid and heavy, arm thrown lazily over Kelrick's waist, fingers curved possessively against his hip. The bond felt different, not humming, not pulsing, rooted, deep and steady like an old tree that had finally found water. Kelrick exhaled slowly. He had expected guilt, or fear, or the creeping shame that court doctrine had always insisted would follow indulgence. Instead, he felt peace. Ilian stirred first. His lashes fluttered, then lifted. For a moment, confusion crossed his face. Then memory returned, and with it, a faint flush that climbed delicately up his throat. Good morning, he murmured. Kelrick's lips curved. It is, Saren groaned softly from behind them. If either of you start speaking poetically before sunrise, I'm leaving. Ilian laughed, quiet and bright. The sound tightened something in Kelrick's chest in the best way. Saren shifted, blinking blearily, and then stilled. Oh, he said. The bond responded instantly. Warmth flared between all 3 of them, not sharp, not overwhelming. Content. Saren studied Kelrick's face carefully. You're different. Kelrick tilted his head. Different how? Calmer, Saren said. Heavier, like you're not bracing for impact. Kelrick considered that. He realized Saren was right. The restless edge beneath his skin, the constant coiled instinct had softened. It wasn't gone. It was simply balanced. Ilian shifted closer unconsciously. The bond tightened in approval, and then the palace bells rang. Once, twice, not alarm, not announcement, recognition. All three of them went still. Kaelric sat up slowly. That, he said quietly, is not scheduled. Saren frowned. Those are the lower sanctum bells. Ilian's eyes widened slightly. The old Foundation wards. Kaelric was already moving, rising from the bed, pulling on a loose shirt with hurried efficiency. The air in the room felt charged now, but not with danger, with awakening. Deep beneath the palace, something ancient had responded. The lower sanctum had not been active in centuries. Its magic predated the dynasty, older even than the triadic bonding rites whispered about in forbidden texts. As they stepped into the corridor together, servants were already whispering. The wards lit up, gold light from the foundation stones. The seers are calling it an omen. Lady Vale stood at the end of the hall, pale and furious. You felt it, she accused. Kaelric didn't slow. Yes, the sanctum responded, to your union. Saren folded his arms. That sounds less like a problem and more like a confirmation. Lady Vale's jaw tightened. It means the old blood magic has recognized a completed triad. Silence fell. Ilian felt it first, a subtle warmth low in his abdomen, not painful, not sharp, just present. He inhaled slowly. Kaelric noticed instantly. What is it? Ilian hesitated. It's nothing, just warmth. Saren's gaze sharpened. Lady Vale's expression changed entirely. That is not nothing, she said. The mages arrived in a flurry of robes and nerves. The sanctum is stabilizing around the triad signature, one said breathlessly. It's not defensive. It's generative, another whispered. The word echoed. Generative. Kaelric's heart skipped. Saren looked between them. Say that in plain language. The oldest mage swallowed. The palace recognizes you as a foundational bond. Ilian's fingers curled instinctively into Kaelric's sleeve. And what, Kaelric asked softly, does that entail? The mage met his eyes. Air-compatible magic. The corridor fell utterly silent. Saren blinked once. That's new. Ilian's breath hitched, not in fear, not quite, in realization. The bond pulsed, not urgently, possessively, protectively. Kaelric reached for both of them at once, drawing them closer without thinking. No one, he said quietly, voice turning steel-edged, speaks of this beyond this hall. Lady Vale looked shaken for the first time since the RUT. If the Empire learns that a triadic bond can produce an heir, they will try to control it, Saren finished grimly, or destroy it. Kaelric's gaze darkened. They will try, he agreed. The bells rang a third time, deep, resonant, final, and in that sound was something undeniable. The bond was no longer private. It had been witnessed, by magic older than the crown itself. Back in their chamber, the three of them stood in silence. Ilian touched his own stomach lightly, expression thoughtful rather than frightened. Saren exhaled slowly. Well, Kaelric looked between them, at the man who had steadied him, and the man who had soothed him. We will move carefully, Kaelric said. No assumptions, no panic. Ilian nodded. Saren stepped closer, brushing his hand against Kaelric's deliberately. The bond flared warm again, not fragile, not volatile, whole. Outside, storm clouds finally broke over the capital. Rain fell against palace stone, and beneath the thunder, something far more dangerous took root. Not scandal, not rebellion, legacy. Rain clung to the palace stone long after the storm passed. Whispers clung longer. By midday, the corridors of the eastern wing had grown unnaturally quiet. Not empty, never empty, but observant. Servants bowed a fraction deeper. Guards avoided prolonged eye contact. The triad had been felt, not announced, felt. Kaelric stood at the war table in his private strategy chamber, staring at a map he wasn't seeing. His fingers pressed flat against the wood, as if anchoring himself. Behind him, Saren leaned against the window, arms crossed, watching the courtyard below. They've doubled the guard rotations, Saren said, under the excuse of Foundation instability. Kaelric didn't look up. Good. You don't sound reassured. I'm not. Across the room, Ilian sat quietly in a high-backed chair, one hand resting absently at his lower abdomen. The warmth from the morning had not faded. It had deepened. Not pain, not discomfort. Presence, like a slow ember. Kaelric noticed the subtle shift in his breathing before Ilian said a word. He crossed the room immediately, kneeling in front of him without hesitation. The movement was instinctive, intimate, startlingly unprincely. What changed? He asked softly. Ilian shook his head faintly. It's not distress. Saren moved closer too, dropping his usual guard without comment. It feels like... Ilian hesitated. Like something listening. The room stilled. Kaelric's hand slid over Ilian's where it rested on his stomach. The bond responded instantly. Warmth blooming between all three of them. Not alarm. Recognition. Saren's jaw tightened. We don't even know if it's possible yet. The word hung unspoken. Air. Ilian looked between them. Does it frighten you? He asked quietly. Kaelric did not answer immediately. He had been raised in a court where heirs were tools, symbols, insurance policies against chaos. But this would not be political. This would be theirs. Yes, Kaelric admitted finally. Ilian's fingers laced with his. Why? Because, if it is real, Kaelric said, voice lowering, then the Empire will never allow you peace again. Saren's expression darkened. They'll call it unnatural. They already do, Ilian said softly. Silence fell again, not heavy, determined. Kaelric leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently to Ilian's. Saren stepped in close, hand resting at the back of Kaelric's neck. 3 points, 1 center. The bond strengthened, not flaring, not surging. Settling deeper, suddenly. A sharp pulse. All three inhaled sharply at once. It wasn't external magic. It was internal. A flicker, brief but undeniable, like a spark beneath skin. Ilian gasped softly, not in pain but in shock. Kaelric's hand tightened. Ilian? Saren's eyes widened. You felt that. It wasn't a question. The air in the chamber shimmered faintly for half a breath, and then, stillness. Kaelric stood slowly. That was not imagination. No, Saren agreed. Ilian swallowed, fingers still trembling slightly. It wasn't frightening. Kaelric looked at him sharply. It wasn't? He asked. Ilian shook his head. It felt. His voice softened. Warm. The door burst open without warning. Lady Vale entered, breathless and pale. The sanctum stones have stabilized into a triadic crest, she said immediately. Not temporary. Permanent. Kaelric's voice went very quiet. Define permanent. The palace foundation magic has rewritten its inheritance recognition. Saren stared at her. You're telling me, he said slowly, that the castle itself now acknowledges the three of us as a ruling unit? Yes, and potential lineage. She hesitated. Yes. The silence that followed was vast. Kaelric felt the weight of the crown. Not on his head, but in his chest. He had never wanted to rule alone. He had never believed he would survive long enough to rule differently. But this was unprecedented, dangerous, hopeful. Ilian rose slowly from his chair. I am not fragile, he said quietly. Whatever this becomes, I will not hide. Saren looked at him carefully. Bravery is not the same as recklessness. Ilian met his gaze. I know. Kaelric stepped between them, not dividing but linking. We do nothing publicly, he said firmly. No announcement, no confirmation. Lady Vale nodded stiffly. The council will demand answers. They may demand, Kaelric said coldly. They will not receive. His alpha presence flared, not wild, not unstable, commanding, balanced by the steady warmth of the bond at his back. Lady Vale left without another word. When the door shut, the tension in the room shifted. Saren exhaled slowly. So, Ilian gave a small, almost disbelieving smile. So, Kaelric looked at them both. We protect each other, he said simply. Saren stepped forward, brushing his knuckles against Kaelric's jaw. That was never in question. Ilian slipped his hand into Kaelric's. And if there is something growing... Kaelric's gaze softened. Then it will grow in strength, he said quietly, not fear. Outside, the rain stopped entirely. Sunlight pierced through the retreating clouds, illuminating the palace towers in gold, and far beneath the stone foundations, ancient magic hummed, not loudly, not violently, but steadily, as if it too was waiting. The summons came at dusk, not from the council, not from the Queen Dowager, from the Serpent Court. Saren read the seal twice before speaking. Well, he said dryly, that's not ominous at all. Ilian looked up from the window seat where he'd been watching the city below. The capital glittered under sunset light. Unaware, it stood on the edge of political fracture.
The Serpent Court hasn't convened in decades, Ilian murmured.
Kaelric didn't look surprised. They convene when succession becomes unstable. Saren arched a brow. You mean when you become inconvenient? The Serpent Court was older than the council, older than the current dynasty. It was a quiet body, made of noble bloodlines that claimed descent from the founding warlords of the Empire. They did not govern. They decided who was allowed to, and they did not approve of unpredictability. A triadic alpha-omega-beta bond with air-compatible magic? Unpredictable was a kind word. The chamber doors opened with ceremonial slowness. The Serpent Court sat in a crescent formation beneath a vaulted ceiling, painted with scenes of conquest. At the center sat Lord Mareth Valsier, silver-haired, elegant, his smile thin as a blade, an alpha of old blood. Dangerous in the way quiet storms are dangerous. To his right, Lady Orville Thorne, a widowed Omega noble whose family controlled the eastern trade fleets. Her eyes were warm, too warm. To his left, Archon Dareth Solmir, High Seer of the Sanctum, Beta, ancient, nearly blind, and standing slightly apart, a figure Kaelric had not expected. Tall, broad-shouldered, familiar, Prince Altharis Valor, his cousin, exiled 5 years ago for treasonous sympathies during a border rebellion, and very much alive, Saren muttered under his breath. "Oh, that's bold." Ilian felt the bond tighten faintly. Kaelric's expression did not change, but the temperature in the room dropped. Lord Mareth steepled his fingers. "Your Highness," he began smoothly, "we convene over matters of stability." Kaelric inclined his head slightly. "Then speak plainly." Archon Solmir's blind eyes turned toward Ilian. "The palace foundations have recognized your bond." "Yes," Kaelric said. "Recognition," Lady Orville said softly, "implies succession potential." Saren crossed his arms. "You convened an ancient shadow court because 3 consenting adults chose each other." Murmurs rippled. Altharis stepped forward at last. "You misunderstand," he said coolly. "This is not about consent." His gaze flicked to Ilian. "It is about control." The word hit sharp. Kaelric's alpha presence rolled outward. Not aggressive, but unmistakable. "You were exiled," Kaelric said evenly. "Your voice here surprises me." Altharis smiled faintly. "I was reinstated." That shifted the air. Saren's jaw tightened. "By who?" Lord Mareth answered calmly. "By majority vote, of course." Altharis continued, voice smooth. "The Empire requires a singular heir. A singular line. Your configuration complicates that." Ilian stepped forward before Kaelric could respond. "I am not a complication." The room stilled. Archon Solmir's head tilted faintly. "You are an anomaly," he corrected gently. The bond flared, not hot, but firm, protective. Kaelric moved subtly closer to Ilian. Saren mirrored the motion on the other side. 3 standing as one. It did not go unnoticed. Lady Orville leaned forward. "There are whispers," she said, "of old prophecy." Saren sighed softly. "There always are." But Archon Solmir raised a thin hand. "The founding texts speak of a triune crown," he murmured. "An alpha of flame, an omega of RUT, a beta of stone." Ilian felt the warmth in his abdomen pulse faintly. Saren felt it too. Kaelric did not look away from the court. "And what," he asked quietly, "does this triune crown bring?" The Archon's voice dropped. "Reform, silence, not rebellion. Reform, which was more terrifying." Lord Mareth's gaze sharpened. "Reform destabilizes the old houses." Ah, there it was. Not fear of scandal. Fear of losing power. Altharis stepped forward again. "If an heir is produced from this bond," he said coolly, "it would invalidate at least 3 major succession treaties, including his own claim." Now the true motive gleamed in the open. Saren smiled faintly. "So this is about inheritance after all." Kaelric's voice turned icy. "You seek to prevent what has not yet occurred." Altharis met his eyes. "I seek to ensure the Empire does not fracture." The bond pulsed again, stronger this time, and suddenly, the torches lining the chamber walls flared gold. Not violently, but unmistakably. The Serpent Court fell silent. Archon Solmir inhaled sharply. "The foundations respond," he whispered. Ilian's hand flew instinctively to his abdomen. The warmth was brighter now, steadier, alive. Kaelric felt it, Saren felt it. The magic did not lash outward. It settled around them, shielding, choosing. Lord Mareth's calm mask cracked for half a second. Altharis stared openly now. "You see," Lady Orville breathed. "It is reacting." Kaelric's voice rang through the chamber. No longer defensive, authoritative. "You convene to judge us," he said. "But the Foundation has already spoken." No one argued, because they could feel it. The palace itself favored the Triad, and the Serpent Court had never dared oppose the Foundations directly. not since the collapse of the Third Dynasty. Lord Mareth stood slowly. "This matter," he said carefully, "will not be decided tonight." Translation: they would scheme first. Altharis's gaze lingered on Kael'ric. "This is not over." "No," Kael'ric agreed. It wasn't. As the Triad turned to leave, whispers followed them, not scandalized now, speculative, calculating. Outside the chamber doors, Saren exhaled sharply. "Well," he muttered, "we've officially become mythological." Ilian's hand still rested low on his stomach. The warmth had not faded. Kael'ric placed his hand over it. The bond tightened. Saren covered both their hands with his own. 3 points, 1 future. Behind them, unseen in the upper gallery, a hooded figure slipped quietly away from the Serpent Court chamber, carrying a sealed message, bound for the southern border, where unrest had been quietly growing, and where enemies of the Triune Crown would be very interested to hear. The bond is real. The southern border did not wait for permission to rebel. 3 days after the Serpent Court convened, a courier was intercepted at dawn. He never made it past the second gate. Saren stood over the captured man in the lower guard chamber, arms crossed, expression carved from stone. The prisoner's seal had already been broken. Kael'ric read the contents in silence, then again, then slower. Ilian stood beside him, calm but pale. "They're calling it heresy," Saren said flatly. "The Triune Crown. They're claiming the prophecy signals the fall of the current bloodline." Kael'ric folded the letter carefully. "The prophecy doesn't replace the bloodline," he said quietly. "It reforms it," Ilian murmured. "That was precisely the problem. The Southern Dukes had always thrived on rigid succession law. Clear inheritance, clear hierarchy, clear control, an alpha ruling in bonded unity, with an omega and a beta, with magical sanction, destabilized centuries of carefully balanced power. "They're mobilizing troops under the excuse of border drills," Saren continued, "and Altharis has corresponded with at least 2 of those houses." Ilian's gaze sharpened. "He intends to present himself as the traditional alternative." "Yes," Kael'ric said simply. A pause, and he may not be the only one. The warmth in Ilian's abdomen had grown steadier each day, not painful, not overwhelming, just present. But that afternoon, during a strategy session with the Crown Guard, it changed. Ilian stiffened mid-step. Kael'ric felt it instantly. The bond snapped tight. Saren was at his side before anyone else noticed. "What is it?" Saren demanded quietly. Ilian's breath trembled, not in fear, in shock. "It's stronger." The air around them shimmered faintly, then, a pulse, not outward, inward, deep and resonant. Kael'ric felt something new for the first time, not just bond magic, not just triadic harmony, a fourth rhythm, small, faint, but undeniably separate. His breath caught. Saren went utterly still. Ilian looked down at his own hands as if they no longer belonged to him. The palace foundations answered. Every torch in the corridor flared gold at once. Servants gasped. Guards dropped to one knee instinctively. The magic was not defensive. It was celebratory. Archon Solmir arrived breathless, robes barely gathered. "It has begun," he whispered. The silence that followed was sacred. Kael'ric stepped forward slowly, hands hovering just above Ilian's waist, not touching yet, as if afraid he might disturb something fragile. "Ilian," he asked softly, voice rougher than it had ever been in battle. "What do you feel?" Ilian swallowed. "Alive," he whispered. The word broke something in Kael'ric's chest. Saren's usual sharp humor was gone. He placed one steady hand over Ilian's and one over Kael'ric's. The bond flared, not wild, complete. Archon Solmir lowered his head. The foundations recognize a viable heir. No one spoke, because that sentence changed everything. Across the capital, in a private chamber lined with maps and coded ledgers, Prince Altharis received his own confirmation. "The palace flared again?" he asked coolly. His informant nodded. "This time longer." Altharis exhaled slowly. "So it is true." Behind him stood a foreign envoy, cloaked in deep crimson, emissary Lord Viremont of Thalos, a rival kingdom known for opportunistic diplomacy. "Your cousin grows stronger," Viremont observed smoothly. "A bonded triad producing an heir will destabilize half the treaties in this region." Altharis did not deny it. "Then perhaps," he said quietly, "the region must be destabilized first." The envoy smiled faintly. "And if the heir never comes to term?" Altharis did not answer immediately, but he did not object. That night, Kelrick refused to sleep in separate quarters, not out of fear, out of instinct. The guards were doubled, the windows sealed, the palace wards reinforced. Still, just past midnight, the southern wind shifted. Saren woke first. The bond jerked hard. Kelrick, the prince, was already sitting up. Ilian gasped softly, the warmth in him flaring hot for the first time, not pain. Warning. A ripple of foreign magic pressed against the outer wards, testing. Kelrick rose, presence rolling outward like a storm barely contained. "They're probing the foundation," he said quietly. As if summoned by challenge, the palace answered. Golden light surged along the walls of their chamber, not blinding but protective. The bond ignited between the three of them, not fragile, not uncertain, ancient. When the foreign magic struck harder, the foundation struck back. A shockwave rolled outward from the palace center. Miles away, in a hidden southern encampment, a circle of mages collapsed as their spell shattered. One did not rise. Back in the chamber, the light slowly dimmed. The attack had lasted seconds, but the message was clear. The Triune Crown would not be easily touched. Kelrick exhaled slowly. Saren let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Ilian leaned into both of them instinctively. The warmth inside him steadied, safe. For now. Kelrick pressed his forehead to Ilian's gently. "They will not stop," he said. Saren nodded grimly. "No." Ilian lifted his chin. "Then neither will we." Outside, word was already spreading. The palace had defended itself without a single guard raising a blade. The foundations had chosen their rulers. And somewhere beyond the southern border, alliances were forming in shadows. Because if the heir was born, the empire would never be the same again. The palace had never been breached by force, so they tried silk instead. The diplomatic summit with Thalos arrived draped in gold banners and false smiles. Lord Viremont returned at the head of a polished delegation, all velvet voices and jeweled hands. Behind him walked Thalos's second prince, Cassian Valor, Omega-born but politically lethal, renowned for dismantling 3 succession councils before the age of 25. He bowed gracefully before Kelrick. "Your Highness, I hear congratulations are in order." The chamber chilled. Saren did not miss the subtle calculation in Cassian's gaze as it flicked toward Ilian, not curious, assessing. Ilian stood calm at Kelrick's side, dressed in understated ivory rather than court regalia. No shame, no concealment. The bond warmed faintly in response to the scrutiny. Cassian smiled. "Fascinating," he murmured. Kelrick's tone was cool. "You requested trade renegotiation." "Among other matters," Cassian replied. They moved to the long council table. Wine was poured, documents unfurled, and beneath the diplomacy, tension. Halfway through negotiations, Cassian set down his goblet. "Thalos values stability," he said smoothly. "As such, we are prepared to offer reinforcement of your claim." Saren leaned back slightly. "And the cost?" Cassian did not look at him. "A unifying marriage." Silence. Kelrick did not blink. "To whom?" he asked evenly. Cassian met his gaze directly. "To me." The audacity rippled through the chamber. Gasps. Whispered outrage. But Cassian remained serene. "A political Omega marriage would solidify your image," he continued. "It would quiet the southern houses. Traditional factions would stabilize. Your triad could remain unofficial." Unofficial. The word cut sharper than any insult. Ilian felt the bond flare hot. Not with insecurity. With anger. Saren's smile was thin as glass. "You're proposing to erase him politely." Cassian's eyes finally shifted to Ilian. "Not erase," he corrected softly. "Reclassify." The warmth in Ilian's abdomen pulsed, sudden and sharp. Kelrick felt it instantly. His control snapped tight. Not volatile, but unmistakably alpha. "No," he said. The single word carried the weight of command. Cassian held his gaze calmly. "You should consider carefully." "I have," Kelrick replied. The temperature in the room shifted. Cassian's smile thinned. "Then I hope your foundations remain as loyal as you believe." A threat, wrapped in... That night, the real strike came. Not magic. Steel. A servant in the West Wing moved differently than he had that morning. Saren noticed first. A fraction too stiff. A fraction too aware. By the time the blade flashed, Saren was already moving. The assassin aimed not for Kelrick, not for Saren, for Ilian. The blade never reached him. The bond detonated. Golden light erupted outward from Ilian's body. Not violent, but absolute. The assassin was thrown backward as if struck by a physical wall, The palace foundations roared. Every corridor ignited in protective sigils. Guards stormed in seconds too late. The assassin lay unconscious, alive but broken. Ilian stood frozen, light fading from his skin. Kael'ric caught him before his knees could buckle. Saren's hands were already searching for injury. "There's no wound," Saren said, stunned. Ilian's breathing steadied slowly. "It wasn't me," he whispered. Kael'ric knew that. It wasn't just Ilian. It was the air, the bond, the foundation, protecting themselves. In the aftermath, Archon Solmir confirmed what none of them wanted to say aloud. The defensive response originated from the developing life signature. Saren stared at him. "You're saying the child cast that?" Instinctively, the Archon replied. Silence fell heavy. Kael'ric's hand tightened around Ilian's, not fragile, powerful, dangerous. Across the palace, Cassian Valur watched the chaos unfold from a balcony. His expression was thoughtful, not surprised. Lord Vairmont joined him quietly. "It failed," Vairmont murmured. Cassian's gaze remained steady. "No," he said softly. "It confirmed." "Confirmed what?" "That the air is not symbolic." He smiled faintly. "It is weaponized." By morning, the capital knew. An assassination attempt had failed before contact. The palace itself had retaliated. The Triune Crown was no longer rumor. It was reality. Southern dukes paused their mobilization. Foreign envoys reconsidered alliances, and Prince Altheris received word that the heir had manifested defensive magic before birth. He did not look pleased. Back in their chamber, Kael'ric sat between Ilian and Saren. The three of them were quiet, not shaken, resolved. "They will escalate," Saren said calmly. "Yes," Kael'ric agreed. Ilian rested his hand over his abdomen, warmth steady beneath his palm. "Then so will we." The bond thrummed. Not reactive, strategic. For the first time, Kael'ric did not feel like he was defending a throne. He was building something new, and the Empire could already feel it shifting. The assassination attempt changed something, not just politically, instinctively. Kael'ric had never felt so close to losing something he had not known he could have, and that fear had teeth. Night fell heavy over the palace. The wards glowed faintly along the walls, responding to heightened security. The air itself felt alert. Inside their chamber, the tension was different, not fear, need. Saren closed the doors firmly behind them. "No interruptions," he said. Kael'ric did not answer. He was watching Ilian, really watching him, as if confirming he was still there, still breathing, still his. Ilian felt the intensity of that gaze all the way down to his bones. The warmth in his abdomen pulsed slowly. Steady, alive. "You're staring," Ilian said softly. Kael'ric stepped forward. "Yes. No apology." His fingers brushed Ilian's jaw. Not tentative now. Certain. "You were nearly taken from me," Kael'ric murmured. "I wasn't," Ilian replied gently. "But you could have been." The bond flared. Hot, protective, possessive. Saren felt it spike and stepped closer, grounding them both. "We're all still here," Saren said quietly. "Focus on that." But the near loss had sharpened something primal in Kael'ric. His control wasn't slipping. It was narrowing, intent. He pulled Ilian closer, not rough, but firm enough that breath caught between them. The kiss wasn't slow tonight. It was hungry, claiming. Ilian gasped softly into his mouth, fingers tangling into Kael'ric's hair as if anchoring himself. Behind them, Saren's restraint cracked. He stepped in, pressing against Kael'ric's back, mouth brushing along his neck. Not gentle, not teasing, marking. Kael'ric groaned low in his throat. The sound vibrated between all three of them. The bond ignited, not chaotic, focused, heat spread through their skin, golden light flickering faintly at their wrists where the triad marks shimmered. Ilian felt it deepest, a pulse of warmth from within that answered the rising desire. Saren noticed immediately. "It reacts when you do," he murmured against Kael'ric's shoulder. Kael'ric pulled back just enough to look at Ilian. "Does it hurt?" Ilian shook his head, breath unsteady. "It feels like it knows what? That they were choosing each other again. Not for survival, not for politics, for want." Kael'ric lowered Ilian onto the bed slowly this time, reverently, as though placing something precious on an altar. Saren knelt beside them, hands roamed, not frantic but searching, relearning, memorizing. Kael'ric's mouth traced a slow path down Ilian's throat, lingering over his pulse. Saren's hands moved over Kaelrik's shoulders, strong and grounding, guiding rather than directing. Clothing became irrelevant again, peeled away in heated breaths and quiet sounds. Skin met skin, heat layered over heat. Kaelrik's control thinned as Ilian arched beneath him, breath breaking in soft gasps. Saren's hand slid along Kaelrik's spine, urging him closer, deeper into the shared warmth. The bond pulsed brighter. Golden light flickered faintly across the sheets, not wild, but powerful. Ilian cried out softly as pleasure rolled through him. Not sharp, but consuming. The warmth in his abdomen flared in answer, spreading outward in waves. Saren felt it like a spark in his own veins. Kaelrik's forehead pressed to Ilian's, their breathing tangled, desperate and slow at once. "You are mine," Kaelrik whispered. "Not ownership, promise, and you are ours," Saren added, voice rough, steady. Ilian's hands found both of them at once, pulling them together. "Then stay," he breathed. The bond sealed tighter. Pleasure rose, layered, shared, echoing between all three of them in waves that blurred the edges of self. When release finally came, it wasn't explosive. It was overwhelming, like standing at the center of a golden storm that did not destroy, only bound. Light rippled outward from the bed, through the floor, into the palace foundations. Miles away, Sears startled awake as wards hummed. Not alarm, recognition. Back in the chamber, Kaelrik collapsed carefully over Ilian. Saren wrapped around both of them. Breathing slowed, heart steadied. The warmth inside Ilian settled, content, protected. Saren brushed his thumb along Kaelrik's jaw. "You feel that?" he murmured. "Yes," Kaelrik replied quietly. "Not just desire, strength." The air's magic had not flared wildly. It had synchronized, responded to unity. Kaelrik pressed a final soft kiss to Ilian's temple. "No one touches what is ours," he said. And this time it wasn't just instinct. It was strategy, because somewhere beyond palace walls enemies were still gathering. But tonight, the Triune Crown burned brighter than ever. The capital loved spectacle. So Cassian Valur gave it one. The announcement came at midday. Thalos would host a unity banquet in honor of diplomatic cooperation and mutual prosperity. Neutral ground, neutral wine, neutral smiles. Saren read the invitation and snorted. "He's bold, he's cornered," Kaelrik corrected calmly. Ilian stood near the window, sunlight brushing faint gold across his skin. He had begun wearing slightly looser robes, subtle, nothing dramatic, but Kaelrik noticed the difference. The warmth inside him was steadier now, heavier, not fragile, growing. Cassian knew it too, which was why this banquet would not be about wine. It would be about optics. The Thalos embassy glittered with foreign crystal lanterns and mirrored ceilings. Music drifted low and intimate. Cassian stood at the center of the hall, dressed in silver silk that clung elegantly to his frame. His smile was radiant, calculated. When the triad entered together, conversation faltered. They did not arrive staggered. They did not maintain distance. Kaelrik walked in the center, Ilian at his right, Saren at his left, balanced, intentional. The bond hummed low beneath their skin. Cassian's gaze flickered briefly to Ilian's midsection, just a fraction too long. Then he smiled wider. "Your Highness," he greeted smoothly. "You honor us. I prefer clarity," Kaelrik replied evenly. "Let's not pretend this is honor." Soft laughter rippled nervously from nearby nobles. Cassian gestured gracefully. "Then let us be clear." The music softened, the hall quieted. Cassian lifted his glass. "Thalos recognizes strength when it sees it, and yet strength requires legitimacy." There it was, he continued smoothly. "Rumors of air manifestation have reached every border. Some are unconvinced." Saren's expression remained unreadable. "Unconvinced of what?" he asked coolly. "That magic alone ensures stability," Cassian replied. He stepped closer. "Too close. I propose verification." The word dropped heavy. Kaelrik's voice went cold. "Explain." "A sanctum right," Cassian said lightly. "Public, transparent. If the air exists, let it be witnessed. Let the Foundation respond, openly." Murmurs surged. A public magical verification would silence doubters. It would also expose vulnerability and give enemies timing. Ilian felt the bond tighten protectively around him. Cassian noticed. "You hesitate," he observed softly. "I calculate," Kaelrik corrected. Cassian leaned in slightly. voice low enough for only the triad to hear. If you refuse, the Southern Dukes will claim fabrication. If you accept, you risk exposure. His silver eyes flicked to Ilian. A difficult position. Saren stepped forward subtly, breaking the proximity. You're enjoying this, Saren said. Cassian's smile didn't fade. Diplomacy is theater. As tension coiled tight in the hall, something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. Ilian inhaled sharply. The warmth within him surged, not painful but strong, too strong. Golden light shimmered faintly along his collarbone. Gasps erupted. It wasn't explosive magic, it was visible life. The air in the hall vibrated. Lantern flames leaned toward him, not burning, reverent. Archon Solmir, who had been standing quietly near the back, dropped to one knee instinctively. The Foundation responds to public doubt, he breathed. Cassian's expression flickered for the first time. Surprise, real surprise. Ilian steadied himself. Not collapsing, not overwhelmed, radiant. Kael'ric stepped closer immediately, one hand firm at Ilian's waist. Saren mirrored on the other side. 3 points, one center. The glow softened but did not vanish entirely. The hall fell silent, not scandalized, awed. Cassian recovered quickly, too quickly. He smiled again. Well, he murmured. That answers one question, but it created another. If the air's magic reacted to challenge, then public doubt could provoke reaction, and reaction could be weaponized. Kael'ric saw the calculation in Cassian's eyes. He understood the public sanctum rite was not about proof, it was bait. Across the room, unnoticed by most, Prince Altherus observed from shadowed balcony seating. He had not been invited, he had arrived anyway. Beside him stood a robed mage bearing southern sigils. Interesting, Altherus murmured. The air's manifestation is accelerating, the mage whispered. Altherus's gaze remained steady. Then we accelerate our timeline. Below, Kael'ric met Cassian's eyes one final time. We accept, Kael'ric said calmly. Saren turned sharply. Kael. Ilian's hand tightened slightly around his. Kael'ric did not waver. We will conduct the sanctum rite in 3 days. The hall erupted. Cassian's smile deepened. Excellent. Exactly what he wanted. Or so he believed. Back in their private chamber, the silence was thick. Saren turned immediately. You walked straight into that. Yes, Kael'ric agreed. Why? Ilian asked softly. Kael'ric cupped his face gently. Because if we refuse public challenge, we look fragile. And if we accept? Saren pressed. Kael'ric's eyes darkened. Then anyone who attempts interference will expose themselves. Ilian understood instantly. The rite would not just verify the air. It would flush out enemies. The bond pulsed. Strategic, not reactive. But beneath that calculation, the warmth inside Ilian surged again. Stronger, faster. Kael'ric felt it. Saren felt it. The air was growing quickly, too quickly, and ancient magic had never been patient. Outside, word spread through the capital like wildfire. In 3 days, the sanctum rite would publicly confirm the Triune Crown, and somewhere in the shadows, forces moved to ensure it never completed. The sanctum rite loomed. 3 days, 3 endless tightening days, and Cassian Valur did not waste them. The following afternoon, he requested a private audience. Not with Kael'ric, with Ilian. Saren objected immediately. Absolutely not. Cassian only smiled. If your bond is as stable as you claim, a conversation should not threaten it. That was the problem. It didn't threaten the bond. It threatened something far more fragile. Pride. Kael'ric looked at Ilian. This is your choice, and that was worse than forbidding it. Ilian nodded calmly. I will speak with him. Saren's jaw tightened. The embassy garden was deliberately intimate. High stone walls, blooming night lilies, a small reflecting pool that mirrored anyone who stood too close. Cassian waited beside it. You glow more each day, he observed softly as Ilian approached. I'm not here for flattery. Cassian chuckled lightly. No, you're here because you're braver than your beta. Across the palace courtyard roofline, Saren stood watching through a long-range lens. He told himself it was precaution, not jealousy. Kael'ric stood beside him, silent. Saren lowered the lens abruptly. I don't like him near Ilian. I know, Kael'ric said, That was it. No reassurance, no dismissal, and somehow that made it worse. In the garden, Cassian circled slowly, not predatory, evaluating. You love him, Cassian said gently. Yes. And the beta? Ilian didn't hesitate. Yes. Cassian's gaze sharpened slightly. Do you love them equally? The question landed like a blade. Ilian did not answer immediately, because equal was not the right word. Different. Cassian stepped closer. An alpha's devotion burns hot, he murmured, possessive, consuming. His eyes flicked toward the palace roof. And a beta's love, he continued. It anchors, but it rarely commands. He leaned closer, voice softer. When the heir is born, which bond will strengthen? The warmth inside Ilian pulsed uneasily. Cassian smiled faintly. You should consider that. From the rooftop, Saren saw Cassian step closer. Too close. His hands curled into fists. He's manipulating him, Saren muttered. Kaelric's voice was quiet. Ilian is not weak. That's not what I said, but jealousy had already slipped in. Green and sharp. Saren exhaled hard. You don't feel it? Kaelric didn't answer. Because he did. The bond thrummed low, unsettled, not breaking. Strange. When Ilian returned to their chamber, the air was tight. Saren stood near the window, Kaelric by the table, both calm, too calm. How was the conversation? Kaelric asked evenly. Ilian hesitated. Saren noticed immediately. What did he say? Nothing of consequence. Saren laughed once, humorless. If it were nothing, you wouldn't look like that. Ilian stiffened. And how do I look? Uncertain. The word cut. The bond flickered. Kaelric stepped forward slowly. Ilian, Cassian's question echoed in his mind. Do you love them equally? I love you both, Ilian said carefully. Saren's gaze didn't soften. That wasn't the question. Silence thickened. Kaelric felt it then. Not doubt in Ilian, fear in Saren. A fear he had never voiced, in a world built for alphas and omegas. Where did a beta stand when Legacy entered the picture? Kaelric crossed the room and took Saren's face in his hands, startling him. You are not secondary, Kaelric said quietly. Saren's breath caught. You don't know that, Saren murmured. Yes, Kaelric said firmly. I do. He turned to Ilian. Tell him. Ilian stepped closer, hands sliding gently over Saren's wrists. The air reacts to all three of us, he whispered. Not just Kaelric. When you steady him, it steadies. Saren froze. Kaelric added softly. When you doubt yourself, the bond tightens. Saren swallowed. You feel that? Always, Ilian said. The jealousy didn't vanish instantly, but it shifted. Not green flame. Vulnerability. Saren let out a slow breath. I don't want to be the expendable one. The admission was raw. Kaelric pressed his forehead to Saren's. You are the spine of this bond, he said. Without you, we fracture. Ilian wrapped his arms around both of them. You are not outside the crown, he whispered. You are one of its points. The bond surged, warm and steady, reassurance flowing both ways. Saren's shoulders finally loosened. If Cassian touches you again, he muttered. I'm pushing him into the reflecting pool. Ilian laughed softly, and the tension broke. Elsewhere, in a shadowed corridor, Cassian met briefly with Altharis. Well? Altharis asked. Cassian smiled faintly. There is tension. Enough. Cassian's gaze turned thoughtful. Not yet. Altharis nodded once. Then we increase pressure, because a bond did not have to be broken from outside. Sometimes, it only needed to be bent. Back in their chamber, Kaelric held them both close, not possessively, intentionally. The jealousy had not shattered them. It had revealed a fault line and sealed it tighter. But the sanctum rite was coming, and Cassian had just learned something important. The triune crown was strong, but it was not invulnerable. The sanctum had not been opened in full ceremonial capacity for over a century. It breathed differently when awakened. The air was thick with old incense and older magic, curling along the carved pillars like golden mist. The foundation sigils etched into the marble floor glowed faintly, reacting to the crowd gathering in cautious anticipation. Nobles filled the upper galleries. Foreign envoys lined the lower arcades. Southern observers stood stiff and watchful. Cassian Valier gleamed in pale silver near the front. Prince Altharis stood in shadow behind him. Kaelric entered last, not alone, never alone. Ilian walked at his right, robes flowing in soft ivory and gold. The faint curve beneath the fabric was no longer deniable to careful eyes. not pronounced, but present. Saren walked at Kaelric's left, shoulders squared, gaze sharp as drawn steel. The murmurs were thunder beneath silk. The triune crown had arrived. Archon Solmir stood before the central dais. The sanctum rite is a ritual of recognition, he intoned. The foundation shall respond to truth. Cassian stepped forward smoothly. Let it respond clearly, he said. So no faction leaves uncertain, polite, provocative. Kaelric did not look at him. We begin, Kaelric said simply. The three of them stepped onto the sigil circle. The moment their feet crossed the boundary, the chamber shifted. Magic rose, not explosive, expectant. Saren felt it first, a tremor beneath the marble. Ilian inhaled sharply. The warmth inside him flared brighter than ever before, no longer a contained ember. A steady, rhythmic pulse. Kaelric placed one hand over Ilian's and one over Saren's. 3 points. Contact. The sigils ignited gold. A collective gasp rippled through the sanctum. In the upper gallery, a southern mage pressed his palm discreetly against a concealed talisman. A whisper of foreign energy slipped into the sanctum's edge, not enough to attack, just enough to distort. The golden light flickered. Just once. Cassian's eyes sharpened. Altharis leaned forward. Saren felt it immediately. Interference, he murmured. Kaelric's alpha presence surged. Not violent, commanding. The bond flared in response. But instead of lashing outward, the magic folded inward, protective, around Ilian. The warmth inside him pulsed harder, stronger. Then, it responded. A second rhythm emerged beneath the glow, small, clear, undeniable. The foundation sigils shifted color, gold to white, white to molten amber. The sanctum floor projected light upward in 3 converging beams. One from beneath each of them. The beams did not clash, they intertwined, and from their convergence, a 4th thread of light rose, thin, brilliant, alive. The chamber fell silent. Even the southern mage dropped his talisman in shock. Archon Solmir fell to both knees. It is not distortion, he whispered hoarsely, it is amplification. The interference had backfired. The air's magic did not fracture under pressure. It intensified. Cassian's composure cracked for the first time. Altharis's face drained of color. Because this was no longer rumor, no longer political narrative. It was witnessed. The sanctum itself had manifested the 4th thread publicly. The light did not burn. It did not consume. It wrapped around the 3 of them like living silk. Saren felt something shift in his chest, not secondary, not peripheral. The thread from him was just as bright as Kaelric's, just as anchored as Ilian's. The air did not center on Alpha alone. It braided through all 3. Kaelric understood immediately, so did the watching court. The triune crown was not symbolic. It was structurally interdependent, without one. The pattern failed. Kaelric lifted his chin. You sought clarity, he said, voice carrying effortlessly through the sanctum. The amber light shimmered brighter in agreement. This is clarity. No one spoke, because no one could argue with living magic. Cassian recovered slowly, expression smoothing back into diplomacy. How remarkable, he murmured. But the calculation in his eyes had changed. This was no longer a seduction game. It was a power shift. When the light finally softened, and the sigils dimmed, the chamber felt different. Not tense, reoriented. Southern envoys whispered urgently. Foreign diplomats exchanged measured glances. Archon Solmir rose carefully. The sanctum recognizes the triune crown, he declared formally, and affirms a viable heir under shared lineage. Shared, not singular. The word echoed like thunder. Altharis turned and left without a word. Cassian lingered just long enough to meet Kaelric's eyes. You have complicated the board, he said quietly. Kaelric's gaze did not waver. No, he replied. We have clarified it. Cassian inclined his head slightly. Then he too withdrew. Later, back in their chamber, the silence was heavy, but not strained. Saren exhaled slowly. They tried to fracture it. Yes, Kaelric said. Ilian rested a hand over his abdomen. It answered. Saren stepped closer, brushing his knuckles lightly against Ilian's waist. The warmth responded gently, steady, alive. Kaelric drew both of them in, not urgently, not desperately, intentionally. They will escalate, Saren said quietly. They must, Kaelric agreed, because the rite had done more than confirm legitimacy. It had reshaped succession law in a single night, and the old houses would not surrender control without blood. But tonight, the bond felt stronger than it ever had. Not because it was unchallenged, because it had survived challenge. 3 threads, 1 crown, and now a 4th rise. War rumors spread by morning, but night belonged to them. The Sanctum's revelation had shaken the empire. Advisors demanded strategy. Generals demanded mobilization. Nobles demanded reassurance. Kael'ric gave them steel. Saren gave them structure. Ilian gave them quiet grace. But when the chamber doors closed, the composure fell away. Kael'ric stood at the balcony, staring over the darkened capital. The city lights flickered like embers beneath a black sky. "They will come for us openly now," Saren said behind him. "Yes, you sound pleased." Kael'ric turned slightly, eyes burning faintly gold in the dim light. "I am done pretending we are fragile." Across the room, Ilian loosened the heavy ceremonial clasps at his shoulders. Ivory fabric slipped lower, revealing warm skin kissed faintly by the Sanctum's lingering glow. "You're not fragile," Ilian said softly, "but you are carrying too much alone." Kael'ric's jaw tightened. Saren watched the shift, the alpha tension, the restrained aggression that had nowhere to go. And then Saren stepped closer, not to calm him, to meet him. "You don't get to shoulder this without us," Saren said quietly. Kael'ric's gaze flicked between them. Heat flickered. Not anger, need. It began with touch, Saren's hand sliding into Kael'ric's hair, firm, grounding, tilting his head back just slightly, not challenging, equal. "You're not the only pillar here," Saren murmured. Kael'ric inhaled sharply. Across the room, Ilian felt the bond shift, deepening, tightening. The warmth in his abdomen pulsed in slow, heavy rhythm, responding. Kael'ric reached for Saren first, not out of habit, choice. His mouth claimed Saren's in a kiss that was all restrained fury breaking free. Saren answered immediately, pressing him back against the balcony pillar, hands strong at his waist. The power between them snapped like a live wire. Ilian approached slowly, watching, feeling. When his fingers slid over Kael'ric's shoulder, the alpha's breath broke. "Come here," Kael'ric demanded, low and rough. Ilian obeyed, always willingly. Saren pulled him between them, 3 bodies, 3 points of heat, the air thick. Clothing became an afterthought. Pushed aside, loosened in heated movements and impatient hands, Kael'ric's control thinned visibly as Ilian's soft sounds filled the space between them. Saren's hands were deliberate, confident, mapping every inch of skin like he was memorizing it for war. "Look at me," Saren told Ilian quietly. Ilian did. Saren kissed him slower than Kael'ric had, deeper, intentional. Claiming without aggression, Kael'ric watched, and the possessive spark in his eyes flared. Not jealousy, hunger. He pulled them both closer, one arm around each of them, pressing them flesh against him. The bond ignited. Golden light shimmered faintly over their skin, not blinding, but unmistakable. Heat rolled through the room in waves. Ilian gasped as pleasure coiled low and heavy inside him, the air's magic responding to the intensity. Not wild, but powerful. Saren felt it through his palms. Kael'ric felt it through the bond. Together, Kael'ric growled softly. And they were. Every kiss layered over another, every touch overlapping, no one left waiting. Saren's strength anchored the pace. Kael'ric's hunger drove it. Ilian's warmth united it. The room filled with breathless sounds and the soft rustle of sheets. As they moved toward the bed in tangled urgency, Kael'ric hovered over Ilian, eyes molten. Saren pressed against Kael'ric's back, mouth trailing slow fire along his spine. The alpha shuddered, control shattered. The rhythm turned desperate, not rough but consuming. Their movements lost polish and gained instinct. Ilian arched beneath them, overwhelmed in the best way. Surrounded, claimed, protected, the golden bond flared bright enough to illuminate the ceiling. Pleasure struck in waves, first Ilian, then Saren, then Kael'ric, echoing through the triad like thunder chasing lightning. When release hit, it felt like falling through sunlight. The glow burst outward once, warm and brilliant, before settling back into steady pulse. Silence followed, breathing, sweat warmed skin. Saren collapsed half over Kael'ric, who cradled Ilian carefully against his chest. The warmth inside Ilian steadied again. Content, satisfied, alive. After, Kael'ric pressed a slow kiss to Ilian's temple. Saren traced idle circles along Kael'ric's shoulder. Outside, the empire simmered. Inside, the triune crown burned steady, not fractured, not weakened, strengthened. Saren's voice was low, still rough from heat. "They'll test us again." Kaelrik's hand tightened slightly around both of them. Let them. Ilian smiled softly, eyes heavy. They don't understand something. What? Saren murmured. Ilian's fingers intertwined with both of theirs. They think the crown is gold. He looked at them, warm, glowing faintly in the dark. But it's fire, and tonight, it had burned very, very bright. The southern houses did not declare war. They declared doubt, and doubt was more dangerous. By morning, sealed proclamations spread through the capital. The sanctum rite had been distorted by unverified magical interference. The triune crown was unstable. The air was an unnatural convergence. Cowards. Kaelrik crushed the parchment in his fist. They will not face us blade to blade, Saren said coolly. They will rot us from public confidence. Ilian stood by the window, sunlight catching the soft curve beneath his robes. They're afraid, he said quietly. No, Kaelrik replied. They are calculating, and calculation could be dismantled. By afternoon, Cassian requested private audience, again, but this time, he bowed properly, to all three. Saren did not miss that. Kaelrik remained standing. Speak. Cassian's silver gaze moved between them, assessing, not seductive now. My brother is moving forward with coalition votes to formally condemn the rite. We expected that, Saren replied. Cassian inclined his head. Then allow me to provide what you did not expect. He extended a sealed document. Saren broke it first. His eyes widened, just slightly. Southern trade fleets, Saren murmured. Half of them, Cassian confirmed. And military withdrawal from 3 contested borders. Kaelrik's gaze sharpened. In exchange? Cassian held Ilian's eyes. Recognition. The word landed heavy. Public recognition of the triune crown as legitimate and binding under imperial law. Silence. Saren's mind raced. That would isolate Altheris, he said slowly. Yes, Cassian agreed. He expects my loyalty. I will give him stability instead. Kaelrik stepped forward. And why, he asked quietly, would you betray your brother? Cassian did not look ashamed. I am not betraying him, he said calmly. I am preventing civil war, he glanced toward Ilian's abdomen, and ensuring that when your heir rises, they inherit an empire, not ashes. It was not love, it was pragmatism, but it was genuine. Saren studied him. He gains nothing? Saren asked. Cassian smiled faintly. Oh, I gained something. Kaelrik's jaw tightened. Cassian's voice remained smooth. I gain a future where I am not executed for standing on the wrong side of history. Honesty, at last. The announcement came at dusk. Cassian Valor publicly endorsed the sanctum rite. Southern fleets pledged non-aggression. The condemnation vote collapsed before it reached the council floor. Altheris stormed into the grand hall that same night. He did not bow. You think this is over? He hissed. Kaelrik stood tall at the throne dais. No, Kaelrik said evenly. But it is decided. Altheris's eyes flicked to Saren. To a beta, then to Ilian, to an omega who... The room dropped 10 degrees. The bond surged. Not warm, cold. Warning. Kaelrik stepped down from the dais, every step deliberate. You mistake something, Kaelrik said softly. Altheris sneered. And what is that? Kaelrik stopped 1 pace away. You think this is about classification? The golden shimmer ignited faintly at his collarbone. It is about alignment. Saren stepped forward to Kaelrik's left, Ilian to his right. The light did not wait for ritual. It responded to unity, 3 threads, then a 4th, visible, alive. Altheris staggered back slightly as the air thickened with power. The court gasped. This is not perversion, Kaelrik said calmly. It is evolution. The air's magic pulsed once, strong enough to rattle the chandeliers. Altheris's composure cracked, not rage, fear, because he saw it, not scandal, not weakness, inevitable succession. You cannot stop this, Kaelrik finished quietly. Guard stepped forward. Altheris did not resist. He only looked at Cassian once. You chose wrong. Cassian's expression was unreadable. No, he said softly. I chose survival. Altheris was escorted away, not executed, not yet, but politically finished. That night felt different. Not tense, not fragile. Settled. Saren removed his gloves slowly, watching Kaelrik from across the chamber. You enjoyed that, Saren murmured. Kaelrik smirked faintly. Immensely. Ilian laughed softly. You were terrifying. I was correct, Kaelrik replied. Alien approached him, sliding gentle hands over his chest. You were magnificent. Saren joined them, resting his chin briefly on Alien's shoulder. It's done, Saren said quietly. Not fully, Kael'ric replied. No, Saren agreed. But the worst fracture is sealed. Outside, the city roared with rumor and relief. Inside, the bond hummed steady, stronger than it had ever been, not because it had avoided war, but because it had chosen unity publicly. As they prepared to sleep, Ilian froze. Kael'ric noticed immediately. What is it? Ilian's hand pressed low against his abdomen. The warmth surged, not painful, powerful, brighter than before. Saren felt it through the bond instantly. That's not like before, he said sharply. The glow beneath Ilian's skin flared visible through fabric, golden, radiant, alive. Kael'ric's breath caught. The air was not just stable, it was accelerating, not toward collapse, toward emergence. Ilian looked up at them both, eyes wide. I think, he whispered. Kael'ric stepped closer, hand covering Ilian's. Saren's other hand layered over both. The pulse answered them. 4 threads, becoming stronger, faster, ready. And suddenly, the story was no longer about legitimacy. It was about arrival. The summit was meant to seal peace. Representatives from every major house filled the grand convocation hall. Southern banners stood beside imperial crests for the first time in decades. Trade accords were prepared, military borders redrawn, history was ready to turn the page. Ilian was not meant to be the center of attention. But destiny has poor manners. It began as a tremor, subtle. Ilian stood beside Kael'ric at the dais, Saren just behind and to the left, an unspoken formation now instinctive. The warmth inside Ilian surged, not erratic, rhythmic, stronger than ever before. His breath caught. Saren noticed instantly. Kael'ric felt it a half-second later through the bond. The 4th thread wasn't flickering. It was gathering. Ilian, Kael'ric murmured quietly without turning his head. I know, Ilian whispered. Another pulse. This one visible. A faint golden ripple beneath silk. The murmuring assembly faltered. Archon Solmir stepped forward, eyes widening. Your Highness, he breathed. The air was not waiting for ceremony. In the far balcony, a cloaked figure moved. Desperation wears ugly faces. A thin, crystalline blade dipped in void poison arced toward the dais. Not at Kael'ric. At Ilian. Saren moved before thought. The blade never reached its mark. Steel flashed. The assassin fell before a scream could finish forming. Guards flooded the balcony. Silence crashed into the chamber. Kael'ric's aura exploded outward, raw, furious, controlled only by purpose, but Ilian gripped his hand tightly. Stay with me, Ilian said softly. The air pulsed again, stronger, brighter. The assassination attempt had done something, unintended. The shock had accelerated the ignition. Ilian, Saren said sharply but calmly, kneeling before him. The glow beneath Ilian's skin was no longer subtle. It radiated. Warmth filled the entire dais. Kael'ric dropped all pretense of decorum and pulled Ilian into his arms. Take us to the sanctum, Archon Solmir urged. No, Ilian whispered. He shook his head gently. The pulse answered him. It did not want the sanctum. It wanted them, here, visible. Recognized, Kael'ric understood immediately. This is not private, he said softly. Saren's eyes sharpened. It never was. They lowered Ilian carefully to one knee on the dais itself. Not hidden, not shielded. The bond flared. 3 threads igniting brilliant gold. The 4th thread surged upward from Ilian like a column of sunlight. The hall trembled. Chandeliers shattered under pressure. Foreign envoys dropped to their knees instinctively. This was not childbirth, as the world knew it. This was magical convergence. Kael'ric pressed his forehead to Ilian's. Saren's hands anchored at Ilian's back. Together, Kael'ric whispered. The word was command, promise, and answer. The 3 threads braided tighter. The 4th exploded outward in a burst of pure, blinding amber light. The chamber disappeared, for one breath. There was only warmth, only brilliance, only heartbeat. Then, the light condensed, softened, settled. In Kael'ric's arms lay a small child wrapped not in cloth, but in faint shimmering radiance, eyes already open, gold flecked with silver. Quiet, alert, alive. The glow did not fade entirely. It hovered around the child like a halo. Saren stared, speechless for once. Ilian exhaled slowly, tears sliding down his temples. Kaelric held the child with reverence so absolute it silenced the room more effectively than power ever could. The heir did not cry. They looked outward, toward the assembled court, and the lingering golden shimmer extended briefly from the child to each of the 3 adults, 4 threads, complete. Archon Solmir dropped fully to the floor. "All hail," he whispered hoarsely. The entire hall followed. Guards dragged the assassin forward. Southern insignia, rogue loyalists, irrelevant now. Kaelric did not even look at him. "Remove him," Saren said coldly. The threat was finished. Not because enemies were gone, but because the symbol had solidified. No rumor could undo what thousands had just witnessed. No debate could dismantle a child born of living magic before the Empire's eyes. Ilian rested weak, but radiant against Kaelric's side. Saren touched the child's small hand cautiously. The glow warmed his skin immediately, not rejecting, recognizing. Kaelric looked at both of them. His voice was steady. "It begins, not their rule, not their war, their era." Outside, the capital bells began ringing, not for battle, for birth. The Triune Crown stood together on the dais, Alpha, Omega, Beta, and the 4th flame between them. The Empire did not fracture, it shifted, and from that shift, a new dynasty rose. Epilogue. 5 years later, the Empire no longer whispered, it listened. The capital had changed in subtle ways. Southern banners flew permanently beside imperial gold. Trade routes flourished. The old succession laws had been rewritten, not erased but expanded. Classification no longer defined destiny, alignment did, and at the heart of it all, laughter echoed down the palace corridor. Crown Prince Aurelian Valor Reese did not walk. He ran. Golden light flickered faintly at his heels when he was excited, which was often, "Stop using magic in the East Corridor," Saren called sharply from behind a stack of administrative scrolls. Aurelian skidded to a halt. The glow fizzled out sheepishly. "I wasn't," he protested. The chandelier above him shimmered suspiciously. Saren arched a brow. From the far end of the hall, Kaelric's low chuckle rolled like distant thunder. "He gets that from you," Saren muttered. "I do not run indoors," Kaelric replied calmly. "You set tapestries on fire at 12. That was strategic." Saren snorted. Across the corridor, Ilian approached with steady grace, robes softer now than ceremonial silks, more suited for chasing after a magically gifted child. Aurelian immediately brightened. "Papa." The boy launched himself forward. Kaelric intercepted mid-flight effortlessly and lifted him into strong arms. Aurelian giggled, gold-flecked eyes sparkling. The faint halo of magic around him pulsed warmly in response to contact. It always did. The 4-thread bond had never faded. It had simply matured. The sanctum rite had been permanently amended. A new doctrine introduced. The crown may be singular in symbol, but power need not be solitary in origin. Scholars studied the triune bond. Foreign courts attempted to replicate it, none successfully, because it had never been ritual alone. It had been choice. Cassian Valure now served as Southern High Chancellor, far less silver-tongued and far more cautious. He had proven loyal, not from romance, not from ambition, from realism. Prince Altherus lived in quiet exile by the western coast, politically neutralized and thoroughly irrelevant. Peace had not erased opposition, but it had silenced rebellion, and at the center of stability, 3 rulers shared one throne, not competing, not overshadowing, balance. That evening, long after council meetings ended and tutors dismissed themselves in mild exhaustion, the royal chambers were quiet. Aurelian slept between them. Small hand curled loosely in Saren's tunic. Kaelric lay on his side, watching the child breathe. Ilian traced slow circles over Aurelian's back. Saren pretended to read. "He wasn't. He's stronger already," Kaelric murmured softly. "He's 5, Saren replied. "Let him be 5. Ilian smiled faintly. "He will carry it differently than we did." Kaelric glanced at him. "How so?" Ilian's gaze softened. "He will never wonder if he belongs." Silence followed, not heavy, full. The golden shimmer around Aurelian flickered once in his sleep, then settled. Saren finally closed his book. "I was afraid once," he admitted quietly. Kaelric looked at him. "Of what?" Saren exhaled slowly. "That I would stand beside history, not inside it." Kaelric reached across Aurelian and took Saren's hand. "You are the structure beneath it." Ilian squeezed both their fingers, and the warmth within it. The bond answered. Not blazing, not dramatic, just steady. 4 threads woven tight as breath. At dawn, the balcony doors opened. Aurelian stood between them, small hands gripping the railing. The capital stretched wide below, alive, stable, hopeful. "When I'm big," Aurelian declared confidently, "I'll make the empire even brighter." Kelric smiled faintly. Saren adjusted the boy's collar. Ilian kissed the top of his head. "You already have," Ilian whispered. The sun rose, golden light spilling over stone and banner and crown. The triune crown no longer burned to prove itself. It shone. And at its center, the 4th flame did not consume, it illuminated. Sequel: The Mad King Rises. Years had passed since the triune crown had forged an empire united. The child, Aurelian, now 10, was already showing glimpses of the power that had made him extraordinary. The 4th flame, alive in subtle surges of light when he felt strong emotion. But power is a mirror, and mirrors can crack. Kelric paced the obsidian floor of the throne room, golden light from dawn streaming across ceremonial armor that had long been dusted with peace. "I don't like this," Saren said quietly. "The northern provinces, their obedience is too smooth, too precise." Ilian, ever calm, placed his hand lightly over Kelric's arm. Control does not always indicate threat. Kelric didn't answer. Something flickered in his mind, a shadow he had learned to ignore in the heat of politics, something familiar from the early days of his RUT. Madness. That night, Kelric visited the nursery alone. Aurelian slept, but the 4th flame hovered faintly above him, responding instinctively to Kelric's presence. Kelric reached out, and the glow pulsed violently. It was not fear, not distress. It was recognition. The bond, once steady, responded differently, tighter, hungrier. "Darker," Kelric whispered softly, more to himself than anyone else. "Power. I can make them obey. All of them. Forever." The words were not idle. In the following days, subtle changes began. The Empire's laws shifted quietly. Punishments became stricter. Oversight more absolute. Governors who questioned Kelric's decisions were reassigned or disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Aurelian's training intensified. Not playful lessons, but strategic drills in both magic and domination. The bond reacted differently with Saren and Ilian. When Kelric grew angry, the glow around them dimmed. When he smiled, it burned brighter, almost uncontrollably. Saren noticed first. He's not himself. Ilian's hand hovered over Kelric's, unsure. The bond is strained. Kelric only smiled, too sharply. At the council hall, a foreign envoy, one who had long been loyal, spoke against Kelric's increasing authoritarian measures. "Your Majesty," the envoy said cautiously, "perhaps some balance." Kelric's amber eyes flared. The 4th flame pulsed from his chest outward. The hall froze. The air shimmered. Magic responded violently to his anger. A guard convulsed and collapsed. Chandeliers shook. "Balance?" Kelric growled, voice low and lethal. "Balance is for the weak. Weaklings do not inherit the crown. They die under it." The envoy vanished moments later. No one saw how, only that the chair where he had stood was scorched. Saren's face paled. Ilian gripped Kelric's arm. "This is not the Kelric we swore to follow." Kelric only smiled wider, cold and unstoppable. Aurelian watched all this from the balcony. His own eyes glimmered gold and silver. He had always been prodigious, but now the boy's magic surged when he felt Kelric's intensity. He whispered softly to the empty throne room, "I will be stronger. I will not be bound." The 4th flame leapt between father and son, simultaneously protective, reactive, and uncertain. That night, Kelric stood alone in the highest tower, gazing over the empire. Moonlight danced across his armor.